Chapter 1. The basement of the Hyoudou house smelled like dust and old cardboard, and that was exactly why 8-year-old Issei liked it. His parents thought he was down there playing with action figures. In truth, he was staring at his own hand, watching a thin green light flicker along his knuckles like a candle refusing to go out. It had started 3 days ago. A scraped knee that healed too fast. A schoolyard bully who took one look at Issei's clenched fist and burst into tears before a single punch was thrown, babbling about a monster with red eyes. Issei had not thrown a punch. He had not even raised his hand all the way. Something in him had simply pushed outward, once, like a held breath finally released, and the air itself had flinched. He did not tell his parents. He did not know how to tell his parents. So he sat in the basement with his hand glowing faintly green, and he waited for it to stop being frightening, and it never quite did. The knock on the front door that evening was not frightening. It was worse than frightening, because it was polite. A woman with silver hair pulled back in a severe knot stood on the doorstep wearing a maid's uniform that had no business existing outside of a period drama, and beside her stood a tall man with crimson hair, and eyes so kind they seemed to apologize for the news he was about to deliver. Issei watched from the top of the stairs, knees pulled to his chest, as his parents let the strangers into the living room without so much as a raised eyebrow, as though visits like this happened every week. Mr. and Mrs. Hyoudou, the red-haired man said, his voice warm and unhurried, "My name is Sirzechs. I represent an old and, I promise you, entirely benevolent organization. Your son has begun to manifest something rare. We would like your permission to help him understand it before it decides to misunderstand him." Issei's mother's hand found her husband's on the couch cushion between them. Either of them screamed. Neither of them fainted, though his father's face went the color of old paper. "Is he in danger?" his mother asked, and her voice did not shake nearly as much as Issei expected it to. "Only from himself, if he is left untaught," Sirzechs said. "What lives inside your son is not a curse. It is closer to an instrument. A very powerful one, currently being played by a child who does not know where the strings are." The silver-haired woman, who had not spoken a word, finally inclined her head toward the stairs, toward Issei, without turning around. "He is listening," she said, in a voice like a closing door. "He should come down and hear this for himself, rather than through a banister." Issei descended the stairs on legs that did not feel entirely like his own. Up close, the red-haired man's eyes were the exact color of the light that had been living under Issei's skin for 3 days, and something about that fact settled a small, unreasonable panic in Issei's chest before a single word was exchanged. "Hello, Issei," Sirzechs said, crouching so they were eye level. "I imagine the last few days have been strange." "It's not going away," Issei said, because it seemed pointless to pretend otherwise in front of people who already knew. "The green thing in my hand?" "No," Sirzechs agreed. "It is not going away. But I do not think that is bad news, even if it feels like it right now." "Would you like to know what it is?" Issei looked at his parents. His mother nodded, slow and tight, the nod of someone agreeing to something she did not fully understand because the alternative was worse. "Okay," Issei said. Sirzechs smiled, and for one strange moment it was not the smile of a stranger delivering impossible news, but the smile of someone who had been waiting a long time to say something true. "Then let us begin with what you are not. You are not sick. You are not broken. And you are, without question, not alone." He straightened up and looked past Issei, to his parents, and his tone shifted into something more formal, more careful, the tone of a man laying out terms rather than comfort. "What I am about to offer you is not something I offer lightly, and it is not something I will pretend has no cost. Training a sacred gear this potent requires time away from an ordinary childhood. Years of it, in places you will not be able to visit as easily as you would like. I will not lie to you about that. And if we say no," Issei's father asked, his voice rough, "then we leave, and we monitor from a distance, and we hope the power inside your son grows slowly enough that it never hurts anyone before he learns to control it on his own," Sirzechs said. There was no threat in it. There was, if anything, real reluctance. "I would prefer that outcome for no one. Least of all him." The silver-haired woman spoke again, and this time her eyes did move to Issei's parents directly. I will oversee his instruction personally in matters of discipline and restraint. He will not be alone, and he will not be unprotected. You have my word on that, and my word is not given carelessly. There was a long silence in the small living room, the kind that seemed to have its own weight. Issei watched his mother's face work through something private, something no 8-year-old could fully read, and then she looked at him, at her son, and asked the only question that mattered. Issei, do you want to go with them? He thought about the boy who had cried at the schoolyard, about the green light he could not turn off, about the deep and specific fear of one day hurting someone by accident because nobody had ever taught him not to. And underneath all of that fear, quiet and stubborn, was something else. Something that looked, if he was honest, a little bit like hope. I want to learn how to control it, he said. So I don't scare anyone again. Sirzechs' smile did not waver, but something behind his eyes softened further, as if that answer had told him more about the boy in front of him than any test could have. Then we will teach you, he said. All 3 of us. And I promise you, Issei Hyoudou, in a few years you will not recognize the boy standing in this basement tonight. Chapter 2. The place they took him to had no name that translated cleanly into any human language. A fortress of pale stone set among floating islands where the sky itself was the wrong shade of violet, and never quite finished the transition into night. Issei spent his first week there simply learning to walk without flinching every time the horizon did something a horizon was not supposed to do. His days, once they began in earnest, followed a shape he would carry with him for the rest of his life. Mornings belonged to Grayfia. She woke him before dawn, whether dawn meant anything in a realm with no true sun, and she did not raise her voice, not once, not in 4 years. She did not need to. Her silences carried more weight than most people's shouting, and Issei learned very quickly that disappointing her felt worse than any physical punishment could have. Control is not the absence of power, she told him during his first week, watching him try and fail to hold a small green light steady in his palm without it flaring into something uncontrolled. Control is power that has been introduced to patience. You have more raw strength in you right now, at 8 years old, than most devils accumulate in 2 centuries. That should frighten you a little. It frightens me a little, and very little frightens me. How do I fix it? Issei asked, his hands still trembling. You do not fix strength, Grayfia said. You cannot fix what was never broken. You discipline it. Every morning, we will begin with breath, and only breath, until you can feel where the power sits inside you the way you feel your own heartbeat. A soldier who does not know where his own weapon is kept is a danger to everyone standing near him, including himself. The breathing exercises took months before Issei could sit still through them without his hands twitching. The meditation took longer. But by the end of his first year, he could hold a steady light in his palm for an hour without straying, and Grayfia allowed herself, on that day and no other, something that might have been the ghost of a smile. Afternoons belonged to Ajuka. Where Grayfia taught restraint, Ajuka taught understanding, and his lessons felt less like training and more like being handed the blueprints to Issei's own soul. He explained the boosted gear in language that shifted, patiently, from a child's vocabulary to something closer to genuine theory as the years passed. He explained draconic energy signatures, the mechanics of power doubling, the way a sacred gear was less a weapon bolted onto a person and more a conversation between a soul and the fragment of a legendary creature sealed within it. Most hosts never learn to speak the language their gear is speaking to them, Ajuka said one afternoon, watching Issei attempt, and fail, to summon the gauntlet without the usual surge of instinctive panic that came with it. They treat it like an alarm bell. Something that goes off and demands to be silenced. You will not make that mistake, because you are going to learn what Drake is actually saying to you, word for word, until the 2 of you are no longer strangers sharing a body. By his 3rd year, Issei could hear the dragon's voice clearly enough to hold something close to a conversation, gruff and proud and, in its own draconic way, protective of the boy it had been sealed inside. You are stubborn for a human, Drake told him once, after Issei had spent 6 straight hours failing to stabilize a balance breaker attempt and refused, flatly, to stop trying. I have had partners give up on less. I'm not most partners, Issei said breathless, sweat soaking through his training clothes. No, the dragon agreed, something like approval rumbling through the bond between them. You are not. Evenings belonged to Sirzechs. This was where the fighting happened, the sparring that left Issei bruised and humbled more times than he could count in his first 2 years, and slowly, gradually, less humbled as the years went on. Sirzechs fought like water, finding the shape of whatever container tried to hold it, adapting mid-exchange, never repeating the same mistake twice, and he demanded the same adaptability from his student. You will meet enemies faster than you, Sirzechs told him, deflecting a wild punch and turning it into a lesson about overcommitment. You will meet enemies stronger than you. What you will rarely meet is an enemy who has trained under 3 of the most dangerous devils currently alive, and that is going to matter more than raw talent ever could. Nights, the rare quiet hours before sleep, sometimes belonged to Seraphal, who visited less often than the other 3 but with an energy that seemed to fill every hallway she walked down. She taught him nothing about combat, and everything about staying human while wielding something inhuman, dragging him out of the training halls for card games and terrible movies and long conversations about nothing important at all. You're allowed to laugh, you know, she told him once, when he was 11 and had not smiled in what felt to her like weeks. The strongest fighters I've ever known were the ones who remembered why they were fighting for something worth protecting. If all this training turns you into someone who forgot how to have fun, then honestly, we failed. Issei laughed more after that. Not much. But more. By the time he turned 16, 8 years had passed inside the training grounds, though careful magic ensured his body and his family experienced the wait as something closer to a long absence than a stolen childhood. He had grown taller, leaner, his eyes carrying a stillness that had not been there at 8 years old, a stillness earned rather than performed. The boosted gear no longer felt like a stranger's voice in his skull. It felt like a second heartbeat. On his final evening in the training grounds, all 3 of his teachers gathered to see him off, an occasion rare enough that even Grayfia allowed a flicker of visible emotion to cross her face. You are ready, Sirzechs said, for the next part of your education. One we cannot give you, because it does not come from training halls. It comes from living among your own kind, human and devil both, and choosing, every day, what kind of person all this power is going to serve. Where am I going? Issei asked, though something in him suspected he already knew. Kuoh Academy, Sirzechs said. You will be enrolled as a human student, and in time, reincarnated into a peerage as a devil, as originally planned before we ever knocked on your parents' door. Your sacred gear made you valuable enough to summon into a very particular household. My sister's household, in fact. Rias, Issei said, remembering the name from years of half-heard conversations he had not been meant to overhear. Rias, Sirzechs confirmed, and something fond and slightly wary crossed his expression at once, the look of a brother who loved his sister and worried about her in equal measure. She does not yet know the full extent of what you can do. I would ask you to be patient with her while she finds out. She has her own battles ahead, and I suspect you may end up fighting more than a few of them at her side. Grayfia stepped forward and placed a hand briefly on Issei's shoulder, an uncharacteristic gesture that carried the weight of 100 unspoken sentences. Do not forget what you have learned here simply because the world outside looks softer than this place did. Softness is where discipline is tested hardest. I won't forget, Issei said, and meant it. Ajuka handed him a small pendant, cool to the touch, humming faintly with contained magic. A failsafe. Should your gear ever try to exceed what your current control can manage, this will buy you time to steady yourself. I do not expect you to need it often. I would still rather you have it. Seraphal hugged him without warning, hard enough to lift him slightly off his feet despite how much taller than her he had grown. Go be a normal teenager for once in your life, she said into his shoulder. Well, as normal as someone with a legendary dragon living in his arm can manage. Issei stepped through the portal that night with new clothes, an old pendant, a dragon's voice settled comfortably in the back of his mind, and 8 years of discipline folded quietly beneath an outwardly ordinary face. Somewhere on the other side waited a school, a red-haired girl who did not yet know what she had summoned, and a life that was about to become considerably less predictable for everyone involved. Chapter 3. Kuoh Academy looked exactly like the photographs Ajuka had shown him during his last year of training, and somehow still managed to feel entirely unfamiliar the moment Issei walked through its front gates. Students moved past him in loose clusters, laughing at things that had nothing to do with life or death, and Issei found himself oddly moved by how effortless their unconcern looked. He was assigned to Class 2-2, and he took his seat near the window without drawing attention to himself, which was more difficult than it should have been for someone who had spent 8 years learning how to disappear into stillness. A boy 2 seats over kept glancing at him, sizing him up with the particular curiosity of someone deciding whether a new student was a threat, an ally, or simply irrelevant. "You're new," the boy said eventually, sliding into the seat beside him during the break between classes. He had messy black hair and an easy, slightly conspiratorial grin. "Matsuda. And that's Motohama, don't mind him, he's counting something again." A second boy, thin and bespectacled, was indeed muttering numbers under his breath while staring in the general direction of a group of girls near the courtyard windows. Issei decided almost immediately that he liked them both, in the uncomplicated way you like people who have never once had to consider whether their next sentence might get someone killed. "Issei," he said. "Hyoudou, Issei." "Well, Hyoudou," Matsuda said, "welcome to Kuoh. Word of advice, stay away from the Occult Research Club unless you enjoy being terrified for reasons nobody can quite explain." Issei did not smile, though something in his chest did, quietly, at the accidental irony of the warning. "I'll keep that in mind." He saw her for the first time 3 days later, in the courtyard beneath the old school building, and every instinct honed by 8 years of training recognized what he was looking at before his conscious mind caught up. Crimson hair that moved like it had its own opinion about gravity. A presence that pressed against the edges of the space around her, subtle enough that ordinary students walked past without noticing, unmistakable to anyone who had spent years learning to read exactly that kind of pressure. Rias Gremory was, by any human measure, simply beautiful. By the measure Issei had been trained to use, she was something closer to a small, contained storm, currently doing an excellent job of pretending to be an ordinary high school student. She noticed him noticing her, which he had not expected, and her eyes narrowed slightly with the particular focus of someone recalculating a first impression in real time. "You're staring," she said, walking closer instead of walking away, which told him something about her immediately. Most people, sensing they had been caught, retreated. She advanced. "You're not hiding it as well as you think you are," Issei said, which was not the polite answer, but it was the honest one, and 8 years of training had left him with very little patience for pretending not to notice obvious things. Rias stopped a few feet away, studying him with new interest, the kind of interest that had less to do with his face and more to do with whatever she was sensing underneath it. "Most humans can't feel what I am unless I want them to." "I'm not most humans," Issei said, echoing, without quite meaning to, the words he had once said to a dragon in a training hall a world away. "No," Rias said slowly, an odd, thoughtful smile crossing her face, "I don't think you are." She extended a hand, and something in the gesture felt less like an introduction and more like the opening move of a much longer conversation. "Rias Gremory, president of the Occult Research Club." "Issei Hyoudou," he said, taking her hand. Her grip was firm, testing, and he did not let his own strength answer the test the way it wanted to. "Not yet. I know who you are, actually." Her eyebrows rose. "Do you? Your brother speaks very highly of you," Issei said. "So does Grayfia, in her own way, which I understand is rarer." The color drained slightly from Rias's face, replaced almost immediately by something sharper, more alert. "You know Sirzechs. You know Grayfia." Her grip on his hand tightened, not with hostility exactly, but with the wariness of someone realizing they had walked into a conversation they had not fully prepared for. "Who are you?" "Someone you were expecting," Issei said, gently pulling his hand back, "even if you didn't know it yet. I think we should probably have this conversation somewhere a bit more private, don't you?" That evening, in the clubroom of the old school building, surrounded by strange magic circles etched into the floor and a silver-haired girl who introduced herself simply as Akino with an unreadable, pleasant smile, Issei finally laid out the truth Sirzechs had promised would eventually arrive. Rias listened without interrupting, her expression cycling through disbelief, suspicion, and finally something like reluctant recognition as the pieces settled into place. When he was finished, she was quiet for a long moment, studying him the way a chess player studies a board that has just been rearranged by an opponent she did not know was playing. My brother sent you to me, she said slowly. Trained. Already trained, for 8 years, by 3 of the 4 great Satans, and he never once mentioned this to me directly. He wanted you to meet me honestly, Issei said. Not as a favor arranged behind your back. As someone standing in front of you, choosing to be here. And are you, Rias asked? Choosing to be here. Issei considered the question seriously, the way he had been taught to consider every question that actually mattered. I was given a choice a long time ago, in a basement that feels very far away now. I chose to learn control instead of running from what I was. I'm choosing now, too. I'd like to be part of your peerage. Not because Sirzechs arranged it. Because from what I've seen of you in the last hour, I think it's worth choosing. Something shifted in Rias's expression, the wariness softening into something more curious, more open, the look of someone recalibrating not just a threat assessment, but an entire first impression. That's either the most sincere thing anyone has said to me in months, or the smoothest thing anyone has ever said to me. I genuinely can't tell which. Ask me again in a few weeks, Issei said. I suspect you'll have your answer. Rias studied him a moment longer, then extended her hand a second time, this time with an entirely different kind of intent behind it. Then let's find out. Issei Hyoudou, how would you feel about becoming my pawn? I'd be honored, he said, and meant every word, and somewhere in the back of his mind Drake stirred with something that felt, for the first time in a long while, distinctly like anticipation. Chapter 4. The reincarnation ritual took place at midnight, in a circle of candlelight, an old magic that Issei recognized from theory but had never seen performed on him personally. Rias explained, with visible hesitation, that a sacred gear as powerful as his might require more evil pieces than a single pawn was typically worth. 8 pieces, she said, staring at the small collection of chess pieces laid out before her. All 8 of my pawns, if what Sirzechs told me about your training is accurate. I want to be honest with you before we begin. I don't fully know what I'm about to bind myself to. You're not binding yourself to anything you can't handle, Issei said. You're gaining someone who's spent 8 years learning exactly how not to become a liability to the people around him. Rias exhaled slowly, something steadying behind her eyes. All right. Let's begin, then. The pieces did not simply accept him. They resonated with him, all 8 glowing in near unison, a harmony that made Aquino, watching from the edge of the circle, let out a low whistle of genuine surprise. I've never seen all 8 take at once like that, she murmured. Not smoothly. Not without strain. When it was over, Issei rose from the circle feeling, if anything, more himself than he had in years. The last quiet gap between human and devil finally closed. Rias studied him with an expression that mixed satisfaction with something warier, more calculating, the look of someone who had just acquired a weapon she was still learning how to hold. Welcome to the peerage, she said. I suspect you're going to make my life significantly more complicated. I'll try to make it more interesting instead, Issei said. Complicated is optional. Over the following weeks, Issei settled into a rhythm that felt, despite everything, almost peaceful. Morning classes with Matsuda's running commentary and Motohama's muttered statistics. Afternoons in the occult research club, learning the shape of Rias's peerage, the quiet intensity of Kaneko, the easy warmth hiding sharper edges beneath Aquino's smile, the earnest, sometimes overeager energy of Kiba. Evenings on contracts, delivering summons to human clients who wanted nothing more exotic than good luck or lost keys found. Rias watched him during all of it with the careful attention of someone conducting a long, unhurried study, and it was during one such contract delivery, 3 weeks into his new life at Kuoh, that she finally asked the question that had clearly been sitting behind her eyes since the reincarnation ceremony. Show me, she said, as they walked back from a client's apartment through a quiet residential street lit orange by street lamps. Not sparring exercises. Not theory. I want to see what 8 years of training under my brother actually looks like. Issei glanced sideways at her. Here? There's an old warehouse district 2 blocks from here that belongs to my family, Rias said. Nobody will see us, and nobody will get hurt who isn't supposed to. I need to understand what I'm actually commanding, Issei. Not the story. The reality. He considered refusing, considered the quiet dignity of restraint that Grayfia had spent 4 years drilling into him, and then decided that Rias's request was not unreasonable. A commander deserved to know the true shape of her own forces. The warehouse district was empty and silent, moonlight falling in long silver bars through broken skylights onto concrete stained with years of disuse. Rias stood at a careful distance, arms crossed, her expression carefully neutral in the way people practice neutrality when they were bracing for something. Boost, Issei said quietly, and the gauntlet answered, materializing along his left arm in a flash of crimson light and draconic scales, the jewel at its center flaring to life. Boost, Drake's voice rumbled, echoing audibly enough that Rias visibly startled at the sound of it. Issei did not push past a handful of boosts, mindful of the warehouse's structural integrity, and of Rias's understandable nerves, but even that restrained display was enough. The air around him thickened with pressure, the concrete beneath his feet developing faint hairline cracks from proximity alone, and when he finally released a fraction of that gathered power into a simple, controlled strike against the discarded steel support beam, the beam did not merely bend. It folded, crumpling inward like paper, the sound of tortured metal echoing through the empty warehouse like a gunshot. Rias was quiet for a long moment afterward, staring at the ruined beam, then at Issei, who had already begun dispersing the gauntlet, his breathing barely elevated. That was you holding back, she said. It was not a question. Considerably, Issei admitted. Full balance breaker is not something I demonstrate in a warehouse 2 blocks from an apartment building, even one your family owns. How far does it go? Rias asked, her voice quieter now, something between awe and genuine concern threading through it. Realistically. If you stopped holding back entirely. Issei considered the question honestly, the way he had learned to consider every hard question. Ajuka's working theory, based on 8 years of controlled testing, is that I could contest a mid-tier Satan-class opponent in short, focused bursts, provided I had enough boost to stack and the discipline not to burn myself out doing it. I haven't tested the upper limit. Neither has he. We agreed that was a line better left untested until it was strictly necessary. Rias exhaled slowly, and for a moment something vulnerable crossed her face, quickly smoothed over. Do you understand what that means for someone like me? I have obligations. A family. Expectations I haven't told you about yet, and probably won't for a while. Having someone this strong standing at my side changes calculations I've been quietly losing sleep over for over a year. I'm not here to fight your battles for you, Issei said, gentler now, sensing the weight beneath her words. I'm here to fight beside you. There's a difference, and I intend to respect it. Rias looked at him for a long moment, something in her expression softening into an emotion that had not fully finished forming yet, something closer to relief than she was probably ready to admit out loud. You're very different from what I expected, when Sirzechs first mentioned you. I imagined someone colder. More like a weapon than a person. Grayfia made very sure I didn't turn into just a weapon, Issei said. She used to say a soldier who forgets he's still a person is more dangerous to his own side than to the enemy. Remind me to thank her for that, someday, Rias said, and there was real warmth in it now, the wariness from 3 weeks ago finally giving way to something steadier. Come on. It's getting late, and Akino will worry if we're not back before curfew. They walked back toward the old school building together in comfortable silence, and it was not until they were nearly at the gates that Rias spoke again, quiet enough that Issei almost missed it. I'm glad my brother sent you, she said. Even if I'm still figuring out exactly what that means. Take your time figuring it out, Issei said. I'm not going anywhere. Chapter 5. Rossweisse arrived on a rainy Tuesday afternoon with a scowl on her face and a resume that, by Rias's account, put most veteran devils to shame. She had been sent from the Norse Pantheon's diplomatic offices on loan, a talented young Valkyrie turned freelance magic instructor after a career stall that clearly still stung, tasked with reinforcing the Occult Research Club's grasp on advanced magic theory. She walked into the clubroom soaked from the rain, silver hair plastered to her face, radiating the specific irritability of someone who had expected a more dignified assignment. I am here on assignment from the Norse Liaison Office, she announced to the room at large, before anyone could offer so much as a greeting, to provide magical instruction to Rias Gremory's peerage. I expect this to be taken seriously, and I expect punctuality, and I expect none of you to waste my time, because frankly I have had quite enough of people wasting my time lately. Akino's mouth twitched with barely suppressed amusement. Kaneko simply blinked, unbothered. Kiba offered a polite, slightly bemused bow. Issei, watching from the corner of the room, recognized something in Rossweiss' clipped, defensive tone that 8 years of training had made him unusually attuned to. It was not arrogance. It was armor, worn by someone who had been underestimated too many times to risk being underestimated again. We'll take it seriously, Issei said before anyone else could respond, his tone even and sincere enough that Rossweiss' sharp gaze swung immediately toward him, visibly recalibrating. And you are, she said? Issei Hyoudou. Rias's newest pawn. Rossweiss studied him for a moment with the particular scrutiny of a professional sizing up a student's actual competence rather than their reputation. Trained under whom, before your reincarnation? Your magical signature is unusually refined for someone this recently turned. Sirzechs Lucifer, Grayfia Lucifuge, and Ajuka Beelzebub, Issei said simply. The clubroom went very quiet. Rossweiss' carefully composed professional expression cracked, just slightly, into something closer to disbelief. You expect me to believe 3 of the 4 great Satans personally trained a human child for 8 years? I don't expect anything, Issei said. I'm simply telling you the truth, because you asked, and because lying to an instructor about my actual training history seems like a poor way to start a working relationship. Something in his tone, the flat, unhesitating sincerity of it, seemed to land more effectively than any argument could have. Rossweiss' shoulders lowered slightly, some of the defensive tension bleeding out of her posture. Well, she said, recovering her composure with visible effort. I suppose that would explain the signature. Very well. Demonstrate a standard offensive circle for me. I'd like to see your foundational technique before I decide how to structure your lessons. Issei complied, forming a compact, precisely rendered magic circle in the air between his palms, the kind of clean, economical technique that Ajuka had spent years drilling into him past the point of unconscious habit. Rossweiss examined it with a critical eye, circling him slowly, and Issei could see the exact moment her skepticism gave way to genuine, professional respect. That's remarkably efficient control for someone your age, she admitted, something almost grudging in the admission. Most devils your equivalent maturity level waste nearly 40% of their output on structural inefficiency. Yours is nearly clean. Ajuka doesn't tolerate inefficiency, Issei said. He used to make me reduce circles a dozen times if the energy flow wasn't perfectly balanced. A dozen times, Rossweiss repeated, a note of something like sympathy entering her voice for the first time since she had walked into the room. That explains quite a lot, actually. Over the following weeks, Rossweiss' initially prickly demeanor softened considerably in Issei's presence, though she remained sharp-tongued and exacting with the rest of the peerage. She discovered, with visible surprise, that Issei was the rare student who either dismissed her expertise nor tried to flatter his way past actual instruction, and she found herself, almost against her own inclination, enjoying their lessons more than any assignment she had taken in years. You're not what I expected. When I heard rumors about Rias Gremory's terrifyingly overpowered new pawn, Rossweiss admitted one evening, after a long session refining Issei's ability to layer boosted strength with precise magical control, a combination most devils consider nearly impossible to execute cleanly. I expected arrogance. Someone who treated raw power as a substitute for real skill. Power without discipline just means bigger mistakes, Issei said. Grayfia made sure that lesson stuck. Rossweiss studied him for a long moment, something thoughtful crossing her expression, the wariness she carried like a permanent fixture finally, briefly, giving way to something warmer. I was passed over for a raiding game team position twice before this assignment. People assumed I was all theory and no practical application. It's oddly nice, working with someone who doesn't make assumptions before actually watching me work. People who make assumptions before watching someone work usually aren't worth much of your time anyway, Issei said. For what it's worth, from everything I've seen, the assumptions about you were wrong. Something in Rossweiss' face shifted, A flicker of surprised pleasure quickly smoothed over into professional composure, though not quite quickly enough for Issei to miss it entirely. Focus, Hyoudou. We still have 3 more circle variations to cover before the hour's out. Yes, ma'am, Issei said, and if there was the faintest trace of a smile in it, Rossweisse chose, for once, not to comment on it. Chapter 6. Xenovia arrived without warning, the way exorcists tended to. A blue-haired young woman with a sword wrapped in cloth slung across her back and an expression that suggested she had already decided this conversation was going to be unpleasant before it had even begun. She found Issei alone in the courtyard after school, sizing him up with the blunt, appraising stare of someone who had trained her entire life to evaluate potential threats at a glance. "You're the one they're talking about," she said without preamble. "The Gremory pawn who trained under the Satans. I was told to expect exaggeration. Church intelligence usually exaggerates. And now that you're looking at me," Issei said, unbothered by the directness, "what's your assessment?" "I haven't decided yet," Xenovia said. "Which is unusual. Normally I decide quickly." She studied him a moment longer, then, without warning, reached back and drew the sword from her back, the cloth wrapping falling away to reveal a blade that hummed with holy power intense enough that Issei felt it pressing uncomfortably against his devil nature from several feet away. "Durandal. I was given it after leaving the church. I'd like to know how a devil trained by Satan's handles proximity to a holy sword like this. Consider it a professional curiosity." "You're testing me," Issei said. "Obviously," Xenovia said, entirely unapologetic about it. Issei considered refusing, considered the unnecessary risk of provoking a Durandal wielder with no clear reason beyond her curiosity, and then decided, the way he often did when faced with people who valued directness, that meeting her honesty with his own was the fastest way through the conversation. "Then test properly," he said, stepping closer instead of retreating, close enough that the holy aura radiating from the blade made his skin prickle with genuine discomfort. "Half measures won't tell you anything useful." Something flickered across Xenovia's face, surprise quickly folded back into her characteristic bluntness. "Most devils flinch well before this distance." "I'm not most devils," Issei said for what felt, by now, like the 3rd or 4th time since arriving at Kuoh, though this time he said it with the ease of someone who had simply stopped finding the fact remarkable. Xenovia studied him for a long moment, Durandal held loosely but ready in her grip, and then, unexpectedly, she sheathed it, wrapping the cloth back around the blade with practiced efficiency. "You held your ground. Most people, devil or otherwise, don't hold their ground around this sword without visible strain." "I felt strain," Issei admitted. "I just decided not to show it." "There's a difference." "There is," Xenovia agreed, something in her expression shifting into what might, on anyone else, have been called approval. "I respect that more than I'd respect someone claiming they felt nothing at all. Honesty about discomfort is rarer than false stoicism, in my experience." Rias appeared a moment later, drawn by whatever alert her peerage's senses had raised at a Durandal wielder standing this close to one of her pawns, and the tension in her shoulders visibly eased when she took in the scene, sword sheathed, no blood, both parties apparently intact. "Xenovia," Rias said, a note of cautious familiarity in her voice that suggested prior acquaintance, "I take it this is about the request you sent me last week." "It is," Xenovia said. "I'd like to formally request consideration for your peerage, Rias Gremory. The Church and I have parted ways over certain doctrinal disagreements I won't bore either of you with today, and I find myself in need of new purpose. Your pawn here has given me a reasonably strong first impression of what that purpose might look like." Rias glanced at Issei, an eyebrow raised in silent, amused inquiry. "Did he now?" "He held his ground against Durandal," Xenovia said, as though this settled the matter entirely. "That's not nothing." "No," Rias agreed, something warm and slightly wry crossing her expression as she looked between the two of them. "I suppose it isn't." The formal reincarnation, when it came a week later after careful negotiation with the Church regarding Xenovia's departure, required only a single night peace, her holy sword aptitude and human origin making the process considerably smoother than Issei's ornate peace binding had been. She rose from the summoning circle with the same blunt, steady expression she carried into most situations, testing the new weight of devil energy settling into her frame with the same clinical curiosity she'd once aimed at Issei. Well, she said, flexing her fingers experimentally, watching faint traces of demonic power curl around them. That's an adjustment. You'll get used to it faster than you think, Issei told her. The instincts settle in within a few weeks, usually. Speaking from experience, Xenovia said. Speaking from 8 years of very deliberately built experience, Issei corrected, which I'm told is a bit different, but the basic principle should still apply. Xenovia studied him again, that same evaluating look from their first meeting, though the suspicion behind it had fully given way to something closer to genuine respect. I look forward to seeing exactly how different your experience really is, Hyoudou. Something tells me I won't be disappointed. I'll do my best not to disappoint, Issei said, and meant it, the way he had learned to mean things, fully, without hedging, a habit 8 years in the making that showed no signs of loosening now that it actually mattered. Chapter 7. The stray devil alert came in on a Friday night, 3 weeks after Xenovia's reincarnation, interrupting what had otherwise been a quiet evening of contract deliveries and homework Issei had been putting off for days. Rias's expression tightened the moment the magic circle in the clubroom flared with the alert, crimson light pulsing in an urgent rhythm across the old carpet. Confirmed stray, Class B threat rating, spotted near the old shrine on the east side of town. It's been feeding on stragglers for at least a week, according to the pattern in the reports. A week, Akino said, her usual playful tone sharpening into something more focused. That's careless of us. We should have caught this sooner. We'll catch it now, Rias said, already moving toward the door, her peerage falling into practice formation behind her. Full team. I don't want to underestimate a stray that's been feeding successfully for a week straight. That kind of survival usually means it's smarter, or stronger, than the initial threat rating suggests. The old shrine sat at the edge of a wooded lot on the outskirts of town, half swallowed by overgrown brush and shadowed by trees that blocked most of the moonlight. The air around it carried the distinct, unpleasant weight of corrupted magic, thick enough that even Kiba, walking point, slowed his pace instinctively as they approached. The stray devil, when it finally revealed itself, was worse than the reports had suggested. What had once been a devil, before whatever process had twisted it into its current stray state, now resembled something closer to a nightmare given rough physical form. Chitinous plating fused unevenly across a body too large for the shrine's cramped courtyard, multiple limbs ending in blades of dark, jagged bone. Careless prey, it hissed, its voice a wet, grinding rasp that seemed to come from several mouths at once. So many little devils, wandering into my territory uninvited. Your territory ends tonight, Rias said, her own crimson power gathering visibly around her clenched fist, the power of destruction humming with barely contained intensity. Kiba, Xenovia, flank left. Kaneko, hold center with me. Akino, aerial support the moment it commits. Issei, Rossweiss been drilling you on layered casting. I want you watching the fight and stepping in only if something goes wrong. This is a test for the rest of the team first. Issei understood the reasoning even as some old, trained instinct in him bristled slightly at being told to hold back. Rias needed to see her peerage function as a unit, not simply watch her strongest pawn end every fight before it properly began. He nodded, stepping back into a ready but restrained stance, watching the fight unfold with the sharp, evaluating focus Sirzechs had drilled into him during 100 sparring sessions of his own. The battle that followed was, by any objective measure, well fought. Kiba's blinding speed and Xenovia's brutal, efficient swordwork forced the stray onto the defensive from 2 angles at once, while Kaneko's raw physical strength absorbed and redirected blows that would have staggered a lesser fighter, and Akino's lightning-carved precise, punishing arcs through gaps in the creature's chitinous plating whenever it turned to focus on any single attacker for too long. But the stray was, as the week-old feeding pattern had suggested, smarter and tougher than its initial threat rating implied. It adapted mid-fight, learning the rhythm of Kiba and Xenovia's flanking pattern and countering with a sudden, vicious lunge that sent Xenovia skidding backward across the courtyard. Durandal barely raised in time to avoid a fatal strike, blood welling from a shallow gash along her forearm. Xenovia, Rias called, alarm sharpening her voice, her focus splitting for one critical moment between the injured knight and the creature pressing its advantage. That moment of split focus was exactly what the stray had been waiting for. It pivoted with sudden, terrible speed toward Rias herself, bone blades raised for a strike that Kaneko, caught mid-recovery from her own exchange, would not reach in time to intercept. Issei moved before conscious thought fully caught up with instinct, 8 years of trained reflex closing the distance in a fraction of a second, the boosted gear flaring to sudden, brilliant life along his arm. Boost, Drag roared, and Issei did not hesitate, did not hold back the way he had for weeks of careful, deliberate restraint, because Rias's life was not a variable he was willing to gamble on proving a point about patience. He caught the bone blade in his gauntlet fist, the impact sending a shockwave rippling outward across the courtyard, cracking stone underfoot, and the stray devil's triumphant hiss cut off abruptly into something closer to confusion as it registered, too late, that its strike had simply failed to connect with anything but an immovable wall of crimson armored strength. That's enough, Issei said quietly, and there was nothing gentle left in his voice, the careful, measured tone of weeks at Koh giving way, briefly, to something colder and more focused, the voice of someone who had spent 8 years training specifically for a moment exactly like this one. You don't get to touch her. He drove his free fist into the stray's exposed torso, boosted strength collapsing chitinous plating like it was little more than wet paper, and the creature's shriek of pain echoed across the courtyard before Rias, recovering her focus, finished it with a controlled, precise blast of the power of destruction that reduced the stray to drifting motes of dissolving dark energy. Silence settled over the courtyard, broken only by ragged breathing and the faint crackle of dissipating magic. Xenovia pressed a hand to her bleeding forearm, wincing but steady on her feet. Rias stood frozen for a moment, staring at the space where the stray had been, then at Issei, whose gauntlet was already beginning to disperse, the crimson light fading from his arm. You were supposed to hold back, she said, though there was no real reproach in it, only something shaken and quietly grateful beneath the words. I did hold back, Issei said. Right up until you were the one about to get hit. That part wasn't negotiable. Rias crossed the distance between them and, without warning, pulled him into a brief, fierce hug, her composure cracking just enough to reveal how close that moment had genuinely come to going wrong. Thank you, she said quietly, into his shoulder, before stepping back and visibly reassembling her usual poised expression. Kiba, Akino, get Xenovia back to the clubroom, that gash needs proper healing. Kaneko, with them. Issei. She paused, studying him with an expression that had shifted, subtly but unmistakably, sometime in the last several minutes. Walk with me a moment. The rest of you go on ahead. They walked together through the quiet, moonlit woods back toward town, neither speaking for several minutes, the adrenaline of the fight slowly settling into something calmer. I've led this peerage for over a year, Rias said eventually. Every fight before tonight, I've been the one making the split-second calls that keep everyone alive. Tonight, for about 2 seconds, I genuinely thought I'd made a mistake that was going to cost someone their life. And then you were just there, like the distance didn't matter, like the timing was never actually in question. It wasn't, Issei said simply. Not for me. Rias looked at him for a long moment, moonlight catching in her crimson hair, something complicated and unresolved moving behind her eyes. Sirzechs told me, before you arrived, that you'd be someone worth trusting completely. I don't think I understood what he meant until just now. You don't have to figure all of it out tonight, Issei said, gently, recognizing the particular kind of overwhelmed quiet in her voice, the sound of someone recalibrating far more than a single tactical assessment. We've got time. Do we? Rias asked, quiet enough that it barely carried over the sound of wind through the trees. Issei did not have a certain answer to that, not with everything he understood, even at 16, about the world he now belonged to, about church factions and fallen angel politics and the deeper currents of the underworld that had not yet fully revealed themselves. But he answered honestly, the way he always tried to. I intend to make sure we do, he said. That's about the most honest promise I can make right now. Rias's answering smile was small, and a little tired, and entirely real. That'll do for tonight. They walked the rest of the way back to Koh in a silence that felt, for the first time since Issei's arrival, less like the careful quiet of strangers and more like the comfortable quiet of people who had just survived something together, and who suspected, without either of them saying it aloud, that tonight had been only the first of many nights exactly like it. Chapter 8. News of the Stray Devil's defeat traveled faster through the Underworld's back channels than Issei expected, and by the following week, the Occult Research Club had a visitor nobody had been anticipating. Sona Citri arrived during their usual after-school meeting, her expression carrying the particular sharpness of someone who had come bearing information rather than simple pleasantries. Rias's fellow student council president and childhood friend settled into a chair across from Rias's desk with the brisk efficiency of someone used to conversations that mattered. "You've caused a stir," Sona said without preamble, adjusting her glasses. "A pawn who single-handedly no-sold a Class B Stray's finishing blow doesn't stay quiet for long, Rias. My peerage picked up chatter from 3 separate Underworld channels by yesterday afternoon." "Defined chatter," Rias said, her posture straightening slightly. "Curiosity, mostly," Sona said. "Some concern from a few of the more conservative old houses about a human trained by 3 Satans being reincarnated into a peerage instead of groomed for something more politically useful to the Underworld directly. And predictably interest from Riser Phenex's camp, though I suspect that particular interest has less to do with strategy and more to do with him wanting to know exactly what kind of pawn might complicate whatever plans his family has for you." The mention of that name visibly tightened something in Rias's shoulders, a flicker of old, tired frustration crossing her face before she smoothed it over with practiced control. "Let him wonder. I intend to," Sona agreed, though her eyes flicked briefly, appraisingly, toward Issei, sitting quietly near the window with a level of professional interest that reminded him uncomfortably of Rossweisse's first assessment of him weeks earlier. "For what it's worth, Hyoudou, my peerage would very much appreciate the chance to spar against you at some point." "Purely for research purposes." "Purely for research purposes," Issei repeated, a faint, dry amusement in his voice. "Purely," Sona said, entirely deadpan, though the corner of her mouth twitched in a way that suggested she was not entirely serious. After Sona left, Rias remained quiet for a long moment, staring out the clubroom window at the darkening courtyard below, and Issei recognized, from months of careful observation, the particular stillness she carried when something was weighing on her that she had not yet decided to share. "You don't have to tell me," he said eventually, "but if something's bothering you, I'd rather hear it from you than piece it together from Underworld gossip." Rias let out a breath that carried more weariness than she usually allowed herself to show. "My family has an arrangement. An old one, tied to a marriage contract with the Phoenix clan. One I never agreed to and have spent the better part of 2 years trying to find a legitimate way out of. Riser is persistent, and his family carries enough political weight that simply refusing outright has never been a realistic option. And now he knows you have a pawn capable of stopping his fiancée's stray devil problems before they become actual problems," Issei said, understanding settling into place. "That complicates his leverage." "It complicates a lot of things," Rias said. "For better or worse, I suspect you've just made yourself considerably more interesting to people I'd honestly rather stayed uninterested in me altogether." "I'm not going anywhere," Issei said, quiet and steady, the same tone he'd used the night of the stray devil fight, the tone of someone stating a fact rather than offering comfort. "Whatever this arrangement turns into, you won't be facing it without options." "That's not a threat directed at anyone. It's just true." Rias looked at him for a long moment, something warm and complicated moving behind her eyes, the kind of look that seemed to be turning over far more than the current conversation alone could account for. "You keep saying things like that so plainly, like there's no question at all behind them." "There isn't," Issei said. "Not for me." Across the room, Akino's quiet, knowing smile went carefully unnoticed by both of them, though Rossweisse, arriving a few minutes later for the evening's scheduled lesson, caught the tail end of the moment, and filed it away with the same careful attention she gave every piece of useful information, professional curiosity mixing, this time, with something that looked distinctly like private amusement. The weeks that followed carried a new undercurrent beneath the peerage's usual rhythm of classes, contracts, and training, an awareness that whatever quiet, ordinary life Issei had hoped to settle into after 8 years of relentless discipline was going to remain, for the foreseeable future, considerably less quiet than he had planned. Fallen angels had begun probing the edges of Kuoh's territory with increasing frequency, small, testing incursions that Akino's growing unease suggested were not simply coincidental. Rumors of Riser Phenex's growing impatience filtered back through Sona's intelligence network at a steady, unwelcome pace. And beneath all of it, Issei could feel, distinctly, the slow tightening of a much larger web of underworld politics that 8 years of training had prepared him to survive, but never fully to predict. Late one evening, after a training session that left both of them pleasantly exhausted, Rossweisse found Issei alone in the clubroom, staring out at the darkened courtyard with an expression she had come to recognize, over the past several weeks, as the specific stillness of someone thinking several steps ahead of the present moment. "You're worried," she said, settling into the seat beside him without waiting for an invitation, a habit she had picked up somewhere in the last month of their increasingly comfortable working relationship. "I'm cautious," Issei corrected. "There's a difference." "Is there?" Rossweisse said, arching an eyebrow, "or is that just a more comfortable word for the same feeling?" Issei considered the question seriously, the way he considered most things Rossweisse said to him, and found, somewhat to his own surprise, that he did not have an immediate, practiced answer ready. "Maybe both," he admitted. "Riser Phenex, fallen angel incursions, whatever's coming next. None of it feels like something 8 years of training fully prepared me for, not because I'm not strong enough, but because none of my training accounted for actually caring this much about the outcome." Something in Rossweisse's expression softened, the professional distance she usually maintained slipping, just briefly, into something more personal. "For what it's worth, I think that's precisely why you'll handle whatever comes next better than most people in your position would. Caring about the outcome tends to matter more than raw strength, in my experience. Strength without a reason worth protecting just becomes another kind of danger." "That sounds like something Grayfia would say," Issei said, a faint smile crossing his face for the first time that evening. "I'll take that as a compliment," Rossweisse said, "given everything you've told me about her." They sat together in comfortable silence for a while longer, the quiet, ordinary kind of silence that Issei had learned, over the past several weeks, to value considerably more than he might have expected 8 years ago, back when silence had usually meant discipline, or waiting, or the held breath before another lesson began. This silence felt different. Earned, somehow, in a way training halls had never quite managed to teach him. Somewhere beyond the clubroom windows, beyond the quiet, ordinary lamplight of Kuoh's courtyard, a much larger conflict was already beginning to take shape, one that would eventually draw in fallen angels, an impatient phoenix heir, and a much deeper reckoning with exactly how far Issei's carefully disciplined power could be pushed before it met something worth truly testing it. But that night, in the quiet clubroom, none of it had fully arrived yet, and Issei allowed himself, for just a little while longer, to simply sit in the calm before it did. Chapter 9. Rias called a full peerage meeting the following Sunday, an unusual enough occurrence outside of contract assignments, that even Kaneko arrived early, settling into her usual corner with a quiet, watchful curiosity in place of her typical indifference. "I've spoken with my brother," Rias said, once everyone had gathered, standing at the head of the room with the composed, deliberate posture she wore whenever she needed her peerage to take something seriously. "Given the increased fallen angel activity along our territory's edges, and given certain political pressures I'd rather not elaborate on in detail tonight, he's authorized additional training resources for the club. Effective immediately, we'll be increasing our combined tactical drills, and Rossweisse has agreed to expand her sessions to cover group coordination alongside individual technique." "About time," Xenovia said, flexing her still healing forearm with visible impatience. "I'd rather train harder now than get caught underprepared later." "My thoughts exactly," Rias said, a faint, approving smile crossing her face. "Kiba, Akino, I want the two of you working closely with Issei on integrating his boosted output into our existing formations without overwhelming the rest of the group's positioning. Kaneko, Xenovia, focus on close-range coordination. The stray devil fight showed a gap there worth closing. And Issei." He met her gaze, waiting. "I want you leading a portion of these drills directly," Rias said. "Not because I'm stepping back from my own responsibilities, but because 8 years of disciplined training gave you a perspective on combat coordination that the rest of us are still building from scratch. I'd be foolish not to use that." Something settled comfortably into place in Issei's chest at the request, a quiet, unexpected sense of belonging that 8 years of training halls, for all their rigor, had never quite managed to offer him. I'd be glad to. The weeks of intensified training that followed reshaped the peerage's rhythm considerably, mornings now beginning with coordinated drills in the school's private training grounds rather than simple individual practice, evenings stretching later as Rossweisse layered increasingly complex magical theory into their group exercises. Issei found himself, more often than not, at the center of it, not as the peerage's strongest weapon standing apart from the rest, but as a steady, connective presence helping weave 8 distinct fighting styles into something considerably more dangerous together than any of them could manage alone. Xenovia's brute force found new precision working alongside his boosted strength. Kiba's speed found new confidence knowing Issei could cover a gap in half a heartbeat if a formation ever broke. Akino's lightning found new range paired with the openings his boosted charges created in even the most defensive enemy lines. And Rias, watching all of it come together over the following weeks, found herself, increasingly, allowing something she had guarded carefully since her brother's first visit months earlier to finally settle into place without reservation. Trust, complete and uncomplicated, in the choice her brother had made for her, and in the young man who had chosen, every single day since arriving at Koh, to prove that choice worth making. Late one evening, after the last of the peerage had filtered out of the clubroom for the night, Rias found Issei still lingering near the window, watching the quiet, empty courtyard below with the same thoughtful stillness she had come to associate specifically with him. "You've settled in well," she said, joining him at the window. "Better than I expected, honestly, given everything you left behind to get here." "I didn't leave much behind," Issei said. 8 years in a training realm doesn't exactly build a life outside of training. This is the first place that's actually felt like one. Rias glanced sideways at him, something quiet and searching in her expression. "Do you regret it? The years you spent training, instead of just growing up ordinarily, the way Matsuda and Motohama did?" Issei considered the question honestly, the way he tried to consider every question that actually mattered to the people asking them. "No," he said finally. "If I hadn't trained, I might have hurt someone eventually, by accident, simply because nobody taught me how not to. And I wouldn't have ended up here, at exactly this moment, standing next to you. I don't regret the path that got me to something worth having." Rias was quiet for a long moment, the kind of quiet that seemed to carry considerable weight behind it, before she finally spoke again, her voice softer than usual. "I'm glad you're here, Issei. Genuinely. Whatever else is coming, Riser, the fallen angels, whatever politics my family drags into this next, I'm glad it's you standing beside me through it." "I'm not going anywhere," Issei said again, the same quiet, steady promise he had made weeks earlier in a different context, though it carried new weight now, spoken in the quiet privacy of an empty clubroom rather than in the aftermath of a fight. "That's not going to change, no matter what comes next." Outside the window, the last of the evening light faded fully into night, and somewhere beyond the edges of Koa's quiet, ordinary streets, the currents of a much larger conflict continued gathering shape, waiting, patiently, for the moment it would finally arrive in full. But for one more quiet evening, in a clubroom that had slowly, steadily become something closer to a home than either of them had expected, that larger reckoning remained, for now, comfortably out of reach. Chapter 10. The fallen angel sightings that had been little more than background static during Issei's first weeks at Koh sharpened, over the following month, into something considerably more deliberate. Akino noticed at first the particular quality of corrupted holy energy she could sense drifting through the town's eastern district at odd hours, always retreating before it could be properly traced. 4 distinct signatures, she reported during a Sunday evening briefing, spreading a rough map of Koh across the clubroom table, small red marks scattered across the eastern district where each sighting had occurred. Not simply passing through anymore. They're circling something. Or someone. Rias studied the map with the focused stillness she reserved for genuine strategic concerns. "Any read on what they're after?" "Not yet," Akino admitted. "But 4 fallen angels stationed this consistently in one district usually means they've found something worth the risk of staying visible this long." "A sacred gear," Rossweisse said quietly from where she stood near the window, arms folded, her professional focus fully engaged. That's the most common reason fallen angel cells embed themselves this deliberately in human territory. They're hunting something specific. Issei felt an old, familiar unease settle into his chest, the particular discomfort of understanding a threat's shape without yet knowing its face. If they're hunting a sacred gear, that means there's someone out there who doesn't know what's about to happen to them. Which is exactly why we need to find whoever it is before the fallen angels do, Rias said, straightening with new resolve. Kiba, Kaneko, I want you covering the western half of the district during patrol rotations this week. Akino, Xenovia, eastern half. Issei, Rossweisse, I want the two of you working the central district directly, since that's where the sightings are most concentrated. Report anything unusual immediately, no matter how minor it seems. The patrols began the following evening, Issei and Rossweisse moving through Koah's quieter central streets under the pretense of an ordinary evening walk, senses extended carefully outward for anything resembling the corrupted signature Akino had described. You're good at this, Rossweisse observed on their third night of patrol, watching Issei's methodical, unhurried scan of a narrow alley they passed, thorough without ever looking obviously suspicious to the handful of ordinary pedestrians nearby. Grayfia used to run surveillance drills with me, Issei said. Mostly to teach patience. Looking like you're not looking is half the discipline. I'll admit I underestimated how thoroughly your training covered, well, essentially everything, Rossweisse said, a faint, wry smile touching her mouth. It's becoming something of a running theme with you. They rounded a corner near the edge of the district's small public park, and it was there, beneath the flickering glow of a street lamp that had clearly seen better decades, that they found her. A young woman sat alone on a park bench, blonde hair falling loose around a pale, delicate face, dressed in simple traveling clothes that marked her, unmistakably, as a foreigner unfamiliar with the area. She was reading a small, worn book by the street lamp's uneven light, her posture careful and slightly nervous, the posture of someone who had recently arrived somewhere unfamiliar and had not yet decided whether it was safe. Issei felt it before he consciously registered what he was feeling, a faint, warm resonance brushing against his own trained senses, distinct from any devil or fallen signature he had learned to identify. Something holy, but gentle, almost shy in the way it revealed itself, nothing like the aggressive weight of Xenovia's Durandal. Rossweisse, he said quietly, slowing his pace. Do you feel that? Rossweisse's expression sharpened immediately, her own senses extending toward the young woman on the bench. A sacred gear, she murmured. A significant one, judging by the resonance. And completely untrained, from the feel of it. She has no idea what she's carrying. The young woman looked up at that moment, startled by their approach, closing her book quickly and offering a small, uncertain smile that carried more nervousness than genuine warmth. Oh. Hello? I'm sorry, am I sitting somewhere I shouldn't be? Not at all, Issei said, keeping his voice deliberately gentle, mindful of how easily a stranger's sudden interest might read as threatening to someone clearly far from home. You're not from around here, are you? Is it that obvious? She asked, a faint, self-deprecating laugh in her voice. I only arrived a few days ago. My name is Asia. Asia Argento. Issei Hyoudou, he said. This is Rossweisse. We noticed you sitting out here alone, and wanted to make sure everything was all right. It gets a bit unpredictable in this district after dark. Something flickered across Asia's expression at that, a brief, nervous glance around the empty park that told Issei she was more aware of the district's unpredictability than her polite smile let on. I appreciate the concern. I've just been finding it a little difficult to settle in, since arriving. I don't know very many people here yet. Rossweisse, with the careful, practiced warmth of someone skilled at putting nervous strangers at ease, settled onto the bench a respectful distance away, her posture relaxed and unthreatening. What brings you to Koh, if you don't mind my asking? It's not exactly a common destination for travelers. I used to work with a church congregation, Asia said, a note of quiet sadness entering her voice. Things changed recently, and I needed somewhere new to start again. Koh seemed as good a place as any. Issei filed the vague, careful phrasing away without pressing further, recognizing the particular shape of someone who had left a painful situation behind and was not yet ready to discuss the details with strangers. Well, for what it's worth, If you ever need anything while you're settling in, you can find us easily enough. We're at Kuoh Academy most days. Asia's smile brightened, genuine warmth finally breaking through the earlier nervousness. That's very kind. Thank you both. They said their goodbyes a few minutes later, continuing their patrol route with a shared, wordless understanding passing between them. Once they were far enough away that Asia was out of earshot, Rossweisse spoke first, her voice low and serious. That resonance wasn't just significant. It was familiar, in a way I don't like. I need to confirm it, but if I'm reading it correctly, she may be carrying twilight healing. Issei's steps slowed, old training pulling forward a fragment of knowledge Ajuka had once drilled into him during a long afternoon lecture on rare and historically significant sacred gears. The healing gear capable of restoring devils and fallen angels the same as humans. The one every fallen angel faction with an interest in sacred gear research would consider close to priceless. Exactly the kind of prize four fallen angels might be willing to embed themselves in a human town to acquire, Rossweisse said grimly. We need to tell Rias immediately. Chapter 11. Rias's expression darkened considerably when Issei and Rossweisse relayed what they had found, the careful, strategic focus she wore whenever a situation escalated beyond simple patrol work settling firmly into place. Twilight healing, she said, pacing slowly across the clubroom. If the fallen angels operating in this district have identified her as its host, they won't wait long to act. A sacred gear that valuable, combined with a host who has no training and apparently no support system currently protecting her, is exactly the kind of opportunity a hunting cell won't let slip away. We need to reach her before they do, Xenovia said, her hand already resting on the cloth-wrapped hilt of Durandal, propped against her chair. Given what you're describing, this won't end peacefully if we're too slow. Agreed, Rias said. Issei, Rossweisse, you two made first contact. I want you continuing that relationship, carefully, without alarming her. If she trusts you enough to accept help before the fallen angels make their move, that's our best outcome by far. Over the following days, Issei found reasons, careful and unforced, to encounter Asia again, first at a small bookstore near the park where she had taken to spending her afternoons, then at a quiet cafe where she admitted, shyly, that she had begun to enjoy Japanese sweets more than she expected to. She was, Issei quickly discovered, gentle in a way that seemed almost deliberately cultivated, quick to apologize for things that needed no apology, and carrying an underlying loneliness that made her cautious optimism about new friendships something Issei found himself genuinely protective of, entirely apart from the tactical concerns Rias had outlined. You don't have to keep checking on me, Asia told him one afternoon, though her smile suggested she did not entirely mean it. I'm getting more comfortable here, honestly. You and Rossweisse have been kinder to me than almost anyone since I arrived. We just want to make sure you're safe, Issei said, careful to keep the deeper truth of that statement folded beneath something that sounded, to Asia's ears, like ordinary friendly concern. Kuoh isn't always as quiet as it looks. Asia tilted her head, curious rather than alarmed. You say that sometimes, like there's more to it than you're telling me. Issei hesitated, old training warring briefly with the growing, uncomplicated warmth he felt toward her. Grayfia's lessons on discretion had been thorough, but they had also, always, left room for judgment, for moments where trust needed to be extended carefully rather than withheld reflexively. There's a lot more to it, he admitted finally. More than I can explain right here, honestly, but I promise I'll tell you everything, when the time's right. For now, just trust that Rossweisse, and I only want to help. Something in Asia's expression softened, a quiet, grateful trust settling behind her pale eyes. I believe you, she said simply. You've given me more reason to, these past few days, than most people manage in months. That evening, walking Asia partway back toward the small apartment she had rented near the district's edge, Issei felt the shift in the air before he heard anything, a familiar, corrupted pressure gathering somewhere just beyond the streetlights, for distinct signatures converging with sudden, deliberate purpose. Asia, he said quietly, urgency threading beneath his calm, I need you to stay close to me for the next few minutes, all right? No matter what you see. Asia's eyes widened, fear flickering across her face as she registered, for the first time, the seriousness in his tone. Issei, what's happening? A figure dropped from the rooftop above them before he could answer, landing with practiced, predatory grace on the sidewalk ahead, black feathered wings folding neatly behind her as she straightened, a cruel, satisfied smile spreading across an otherwise striking face. "Well," the fallen angel said, her voice carrying a lazy, dangerous amusement, "isn't this convenient? Saves us the trouble of breaking into her apartment." Her eyes flicked toward Issei, sharpening with sudden, wary interest. "And here I thought we'd simply be dealing with an unguarded little healer. This complicates things a bit, doesn't it?" 3 more figures descended around them in a loose, deliberate circle, cutting off any easy retreat, their combined presence pressing against Issei's senses with the thick, oppressive weight of corrupted holy energy. "You must be the reason Gremory's territory has gotten so troublesome to work in lately," the lead fallen angel continued, studying Issei with open, calculating curiosity. "Rainier, by the way, since introductions seem in order before things get unpleasant. And you're going to hand over the girl, quietly, or we do this the difficult way?" "Your choice." Issei stepped smoothly between Rainier and Asia, positioning himself with the calm, unhurried readiness of 8 years of training settling naturally into place. "I'm going to go ahead and pick the difficult way," he said. "Mostly because you were never getting her either way." Rainier's smile sharpened into something colder. "Confident, for a devil facing 4 of us alone." "I'm not facing 4 of you," Issei said, and the boosted gear flared to life along his arm in a burst of crimson light, the gauntlet's jewel pulsing with contained, patient power. "I'm facing 4 of you who are about to have a very bad night." Chapter 12. The fight that followed was, by design, short. Issei had learned, over 8 years of careful instruction, exactly how much restraint a situation required, and this situation, with Asia's safety directly at stake and 4 hostile fallen angels showing no interest in a peaceful resolution, required considerably less restraint than he had shown against the stray devil weeks earlier. "Boost," Drake rumbled, and Issei did not wait for a second activation before moving, closing the distance to the nearest fallen angel, a tall man with twin light spears already forming in either hand, faster than the fallen angel's own combat instincts could fully process. The impact of Issei's boosted strike sent the man crashing backward through the low wall of a nearby storefront, unconscious before the dust had fully settled. Asia let out a small, startled gasp behind him, pressed protectively against the building at his back, and Issei spared half a second to confirm she remained unharmed before turning to face the remaining 3. "Donasik," Rainier snapped, irritation sharpening her voice as she took in her fallen companion, "get up, you absolute fool." When he did not stir, her expression shifted from irritation into something more genuinely wary, her earlier lazy confidence visibly cracking. "That's twice the reports underestimated this one." A second fallen angel, a tall woman with dark hair, moved with sudden, sharp precision, twin light spears flying toward Issei in a coordinated volley meant to force him back on the defensive. He caught one spear in his gauntlet fist, the light dissolving harmlessly against boosted crimson scales, and sidestepped the second with the economical, unhurried grace of someone who had dodged considerably faster attacks in far less forgiving training conditions. "Boost," Drake said again, and Issei felt the familiar surge of doubled power settle comfortably into his limbs. He closed the distance to the dark-haired woman before she could summon another volley, a single, controlled strike sending her crumpling to the pavement beside her unconscious companion. The 4th fallen angel, smaller and younger looking than the others, took one look at the rapidly shifting odds and turned to flee without hesitation, wings snapping open in a desperate bid for altitude. "Middled, don't you dare," Rainier hissed, though the younger fallen angel was already well beyond the range of her voice, vanishing into the night sky without a backward glance. That left Rainier alone, her earlier confidence entirely gone now, replaced by the sharp, calculating wariness of someone recalculating an engagement that had gone catastrophically wrong in under a minute. "Fine," she said, forcing false bravado back into her voice, though her hands trembled slightly as she summoned a fresh light spear. "One devil brat isn't going to stop me from finishing this job." "You're not finishing anything tonight," Issei said, stepping forward with the calm, deliberate patience of someone who had already decided the outcome of this exchange several moves ago. "You've lost. The only decision left is whether you make this harder on yourself by pretending otherwise." Rainer's jaw tightened, calculation flickering rapidly behind her eyes as she weighed her rapidly narrowing options, and for one tense moment Issei genuinely believed she might attempt something reckless despite the obvious futility of it. Instead, with a sharp, frustrated snarl, she hurled her light spear wide, a distraction rather than a genuine attack, and used the resulting half-second of Issei's attention to launch herself skyward, wings beating hard against the night air. "This isn't over," she called down, already well out of reach, her voice carrying more genuine anger than her earlier confident menace had. "Kokabiel will hear about this, one way or another." Issei let her go, judging correctly that chasing her through open sky while Asia remained vulnerable on the ground was not a trade worth making, and the name she had thrown back at him settled uneasily into a corner of his mind, when he made a note to raise with Rias the moment they returned to the clubroom. Asia emerged slowly from where she had pressed herself against the storefront wall, staring at the two unconscious fallen angels sprawled across the sidewalk with wide, shocked eyes, the full weight of what she had just witnessed clearly settling over her in stages. "Issei," she said, her voice small and unsteady, "what was that?" "What are you?" Issei dispersed the gauntlet, the crimson light fading from his arm, and turned to face her with the same gentle patience he had used from their first meeting in the park. "That's the part one promised I'd explain," he said. "I know this is a lot, all at once, and I'm sorry you had to find out this way. But I need you to trust me a little longer, all right? We should get you somewhere safe first, and then I'll tell you everything." Asia looked at him for a long moment, fear and confusion warring visibly with the trust that had been building steadily between them over the past several days, and then, slowly, she nodded. "All right," she said, her voice steadying. "I trust you, Issei. I just hope the explanation makes sense of all this." "It will," Issei promised, gently guiding her away from the two unconscious fallen angels and back toward the old school building, where Rias and the rest of the peerage were, he strongly suspected, about to have a very long night ahead of them. "It might take a while, but it will." Chapter 13. Rias listened to the full account with the focused, careful attention she gave every serious threat report, her expression tightening at the mention of Kokabiel's name. "That's not a name I wanted to hear tonight," she said, once Issei had finished. "Kokabiel is one of the Gregory's most senior fallen angels. If Rainer's cell is operating under his direct interest, this isn't simply a rogue faction chasing a valuable sacred gear anymore. This could be something with far larger political implications." Asia, seated nervously on the clubroom's worn couch with Rossweisse beside her, offering quiet, steadying reassurance, absorbed the unfamiliar terms with wide, overwhelmed eyes. "I still don't fully understand," she admitted. "Devils, fallen angels, all of this. I only left the church because they told me my healing power had become a liability to the congregation. I never expected any of this." Rias's expression softened considerably, crossing the room to kneel in front of Asia with a gentleness that Issei had come to recognize as genuinely characteristic of her, beneath the composed authority she carried as club president. "I'm sorry you were forced into all of this without warning," she said. "But I want you to understand something important. What you carry, Twilight Healing, is not a liability. It's an extraordinarily rare gift, and it's one that people like the four who attacked you tonight will keep pursuing as long as you remain unprotected." "Unprotected," Asia repeated, a fresh wave of fear crossing her face. "Which is why I'd like to offer you a choice," Rias said, her voice steady and sincere. "You could stay here, in Kuoh, under my peerage's protection, as a devil. It would mean leaving behind the life you knew before, in certain ways, but it would also mean you'd never have to face another night like tonight alone, unprepared, and afraid." Asia's gaze moved slowly from Rias, to Rossweisse's quiet, encouraging presence beside her, and finally to Issei, standing near the window with the same steady, patient warmth he had shown her from their very first meeting in the park. "Would I still be able to see you?" she asked him, quiet and uncertain, the question carrying more weight than its simple phrasing suggested. "After all this? I don't have many people left, Issei. I don't think I could handle losing the ones I've only just found." "You wouldn't be losing anyone," Issei said, crossing the room to kneel beside Rias, meeting Asia's frightened, hopeful gaze directly. If anything, you'd be gaining a lot more people who care what happens to you. I meant what I said earlier tonight. I'll be here, whatever you decide. Asia was quiet for a long moment, tears gathering at the corners of her eyes, though her expression carried more relief than sorrow by the time she finally spoke again. Then yes, she said. I'd like to stay. I'd like to be part of this, if you'll have me. The reincarnation ceremony took place that same night, a single bishop piece resonating cleanly with Asia's gentle, healing nature, the transition considerably smoother and less overwhelming than either of Issei's or Xenovia's had been. She rose from the circle looking, if anything, more settled than Issei had seen her since their first meeting, some of the anxious uncertainty she had carried finally beginning to ease. How do you feel? Rossweisse asked, watching her with careful, professional attention. Different, Asia admitted, flexing her fingers experimentally, watching faint traces of new power curl around them, considerably gentler in its manifestation than the sharp, crimson energy Issei carried. But not bad different. Just new. New is a good place to start, Issei told her, and her answering smile carried more genuine warmth than any smile she had offered him since the night they first met. Later, once Asia had been settled into a guest room at the old school building for the night, safely under the peerage's watchful protection, Rias called Issei aside for a private conversation, her expression carrying the particular weight of someone who had been quietly turning something over in her mind for several hours. Kokabiel, she said, once they were alone. I need to send word to the Underworld about tonight, both the attack and the name Rainier mentioned. If a fallen angel of his standing has taken personal interest in Kuoh's territory, that's not a threat we can simply absorb into our regular patrol rotations. This needs my brother's direct attention. You think this is connected to something bigger, Issei said. I think, Rias said slowly, that Kokabiel has never been the kind of fallen angel who involves himself in small, opportunistic sacred gear hunts without a larger reason. If he's genuinely interested in what happened tonight, we may be looking at the opening move of something considerably more dangerous than a single hostile cell operating in our territory. Issei absorbed the weight of that assessment quietly, old training settling into the familiar, focused calm of someone preparing for a threat rather than simply reacting to one. Then we'll be ready for it, he said. Whatever it turns out to be. Rias looked at him for a long moment, something steady and grateful settling behind her eyes. I have no doubt of that, she said. I just hope readiness is enough, when the time comes. Chapter 14. The formal summons arrived 3 days later, delivered not through Sona's usual discreet underworld channels but through a direct, ceremonial magic circle that unfurled itself across the clubroom floor with theatrical, deliberate flair, gold and crimson light spiraling outward in an unmistakable declaration of Phoenix House heraldry. Riser Phenex stepped through the circle with the languid, self-satisfied confidence of a man entirely accustomed to entering rooms as though he already owned them, flanked by 2 members of his own peerage who hovered a respectful step behind him. Rias, my dear, he said, his tone carrying an easy, performative warmth that did nothing to soften the cold calculation visible beneath it, you've been remarkably difficult to reach lately. I do hope you haven't been avoiding me. I've been busy, Rias said, her voice carefully controlled, the composed neutrality she wore whenever dealing directly with him settling firmly into place. Kuoh's territory has required considerably more attention than usual, as I'm sure you're aware, given how quickly certain rumors travel through underworld circles these days. Oh, I'm quite aware, Riser said, his gaze drifting deliberately toward Issei, standing near the window with the same watchful, guarded stillness he had carried since the circle first activated. Rumors of a remarkably overpowered new pawn, trained personally by 3 of the 4 great Satans, have been rather difficult to avoid lately. I confess I was curious enough to see him for myself. And now you have, Issei said evenly, meeting Riser's gaze without hesitation. Was there something specific you wanted, or is this simply a social call? Riser's easy smile tightened at the directness, a flicker of genuine irritation crossing his otherwise carefully composed expression before he smoothed it back over. Direct. I suppose that's to be expected, from someone raised by soldiers rather than nobility. He turned his attention back to Rias, his tone shifting into something more formal, more pointed. I've come to remind you, Rias, that our engagement remains a binding arrangement, regardless of how many powerful new pieces you've recently acquired. My family has been more than patient with your continued delays, but that patience has limits, and I confess your recent, sudden acquisition of such formidable new assets has made certain members of my family considerably less patient than they were even a few weeks ago. The engagement was arranged without my consent, Rias said, her composed tone finally carrying an edge of genuine frustration. I've made my position on this clear more times than I can count, Riser. Nothing has changed simply because you've decided to visit unannounced. Something has changed, actually, Riser said, his gaze flicking pointedly toward Issei once more. Your family's leverage. And mine, for that matter. I think it's time we settled this properly, don't you? Through a rating game, formally sanctioned, rather than these increasingly tiresome verbal negotiations that never seemed to reach any actual conclusion. The room went very still. Rias's expression, carefully composed until that moment, finally cracked into something sharper, more alert. You're formally challenging me. I'm formally challenging you, Riser confirmed, a satisfied, confident smile spreading across his face as he registered the shift in the room's tension. If your peerage defeats mine, I'll release you from the engagement entirely, with my family's full and binding agreement. If mine defeats yours, however, the wedding proceeds immediately, no further delays, no further negotiations. I think that's more than fair, given how long you've kept this arrangement unresolved. And if I refuse the challenge outright, Rias said, though her tone suggested she already suspected the answer, then the engagement stands regardless, uncontested, and the wedding proceeds on my family's preferred timeline instead of yours, Riser said, spreading his hands as though the outcome were simply a matter of practical inevitability rather than genuine ultimatum. I'd think carefully before choosing that particular option, my dear. A rating game, at least, gives you an actual chance to change your circumstances. Refusing simply guarantees the outcome you claim to want least. Issei watched Rias absorb the full weight of the ultimatum, her jaw tightening, her hands curling slowly into fists at her sides, and felt something old and protective settle firmly into place beneath his own carefully maintained calm. She'll accept, Issei said, stepping forward before Rias could respond, his voice carrying the same quiet, unhesitating certainty he had used the night of the stray devil fight. But you should understand exactly what you're challenging before this goes any further, Riser. I don't intend to lose. Riser's gaze swung toward him, amusement flickering behind cold, calculating eyes. Confidence. I do admire that, even in someone who has no real understanding yet of what a Phoenix peerage is fully capable of. I understand exactly what I'm capable of, Issei said. That's usually enough. We'll see, Riser said, though the dismissive edge in his voice carried, for just a moment, a flicker of something closer to genuine caution than he likely intended to reveal. Talent alone has never been sufficient against a peerage with genuine rating game experience behind it, whatever your training might have taught you about raw individual strength. Then it's fortunate I don't intend to rely on talent alone, Issei said. Rias's peerage is a great deal more than any single piece standing in this room, myself included. You would do well to remember that, before the match actually begins. For a long moment, the two of them simply studied each other across the clubroom, an unspoken challenge passing between them that had little to do with the formal terms Riser had just laid out and everything to do with the simple, immovable fact that Issei was not going to allow this outcome to happen without a genuine fight. Riser broke the silence first, a short, dismissive laugh cutting through the tension as he turned back toward Rias, his earlier composed confidence fully restored. I'll have my family finalize the formal rating game arrangements within the week. I do hope your peerage proves at least somewhat entertaining, Rias. It would be a shame to win this so easily that the wedding feels like an afterthought. He stepped back through the summoning circle without waiting for a response, his peerage members following a beat behind him, and the gold and crimson light collapsed back into nothing, leaving the clubroom in sudden, heavy silence. Rias exhaled slowly, some of the rigid composure finally leaving her shoulders now that Riser's presence had fully withdrawn. Well, she said, her voice quieter now, carrying equal parts exhaustion and grim resolve. I suppose that settles the timeline, one way or another. We'll be ready, Issei said, crossing the room to stand beside her, the same steady, unwavering promise he had made more times than he could count since arriving at Kuoh. Whatever it takes. Rias looked at him for a long moment, something fierce and grateful and quietly determined settling behind her eyes, the weight of an old, unwanted arrangement finally meeting something that felt, for the first time in a long while, like a genuine chance at a different outcome. Then let's make sure Riser Phenex regrets ever issuing that challenge, she said, and the old school building's clubroom, quiet and worn and steadily becoming something closer to a home than either of them had expected, settled into the focused, determined calm of a peerage beginning to prepare for the fight that would decide considerably more than a single rating game. Outside the clubroom window, the last light of the evening faded slowly into night, and somewhere beyond Kuoh's quiet streets, in Underworld estates and family council chambers alike, word of Riser Phenex's formal challenge had already begun spreading through channels far beyond the small, determined group now preparing to answer it, setting into motion consequences that none of them, not even Issei, could yet fully predict. Chapter 15. News of the formal rating game challenge spread through the Underworld with predictable speed, and by the following morning, Sirzechs himself arrived at the old school building, stepping through a private family circle with none of Riser's theatrical flair, his expression carrying a controlled worry that Issei had rarely seen on him during their 8 years of training together. I came as soon as I heard, Sirzechs said, embracing Rias briefly before turning his attention to the rest of the assembled peerage. I want you to know, Rias, that you were never obligated to accept a challenge on Riser's timeline. I could have intervened at the family level, and delayed the inevitable by a few more months, at best, Rias said, though there was no real bitterness in it, only tired, clear-eyed realism. I'd rather settle this properly, Sirzechs. On my own terms, with my own peerage, than keep hiding behind family intervention indefinitely. Sirzechs studied her for a long moment, something proud and worried moving behind his eyes in equal measure, before he nodded slowly. Then I'll support that decision fully. Which is why I've arranged additional training time in the Underworld's official rating game preparation facilities, available to your peerage starting this week. Riser will have the advantage of a peerage with considerably more collective rating game experience. We need to close that gap as quickly as possible. How much time do we have? Xenovia asked, already calculating the practical shape of the challenge ahead. 3 weeks, Sirzechs said. Standard preparation window for a formally sanctioned engagement match. It's not generous, but it's enough time to make meaningful progress, particularly given the caliber of training several members of this peerage have already received. His gaze flicked briefly, meaningfully toward Issei. 3 weeks is enough, Issei said, quiet certainty in his voice. We'll make it enough. The preparation facility, when they arrived the following afternoon through a much larger, more formal Underworld transit circle, resembled a vast, adaptable arena capable of simulating dozens of distinct battlefield conditions, from dense forest terrain to open desert flats to the narrow, tactical choke points of ruined urban structures. Rossweisse, given expanded authority over the peerage's magical strategy for the duration of their preparation, wasted no time establishing a rigorous, demanding schedule. Riser's peerage relies heavily on his own regenerative capability as their central strategic anchor, she explained during their first full briefing, a holographic display of Phenex clan rating game history rotating slowly above the arena's central table. Standard strategy against a Phenex heir focuses on either overwhelming force before regeneration can compensate, or precise, coordinated strikes that outpace his healing rate entirely. Given what I've seen from this peerage, I believe we're capable of the second approach, provided our coordination holds under pressure. And if it doesn't hold, Kiba asked? Then Issei becomes the fallback plan, Rossweisse said simply. Which is not how I'd prefer to structure this. Relying entirely on one member's overwhelming strength makes the rest of the peerage's growth largely irrelevant to the outcome, and I don't think that's a lesson worth reinforcing, even under time pressure like this. Issei found himself, over the following days, appreciating Rossweisse's insistence on genuine collective growth more than he expected to. Where a simpler strategy might have simply positioned him as the peerage's decisive answer to every problem, Rossweisse instead structured drill after drill around forcing each member to close their own individual gaps, using Issei's presence as a supporting anchor rather than a substitute for their own development. Xenovia's sword work sharpened considerably under the pressure of coordinated drills against simulated Phenex peerage members, her instinctive aggression tempered increasingly by patient, calculated timing. Kiba's speed found new tactical purpose paired with precise, disciplined feints rather than simple overwhelming velocity. Kaniko's raw strength found refined control, learning to redirect rather than simply absorb incoming force. Akino's lightning found devastating new range and precision, particularly once Rossweisse began pairing her with Asia's gentle, steady healing support during extended engagement simulations. Asia, for her part, adapted to her new role with a quiet, determined focus that surprised everyone who had initially worried a recently reincarnated bishop might struggle under the pressure of formal raiding game preparation. "I want to be useful," she told Issei plainly, during a rare quiet moment between drills, sweat and exhaustion visible on her face despite her steady resolve. "Everyone here has given me so much, since that night in the park. I don't want to be the reason this peerage falls short of what it's capable of." "You won't be," Issei told her, and meant it fully. Healing support under pressure is one of the hardest roles in any coordinated fight. You're handling it better than most trained devils twice your experience. Asia's answering smile carried the particular warmth of someone who had, in a very short span of time, found herself somewhere that finally felt like it wanted her there. "Thank you, Issei. For everything, honestly. I don't think I've said that clearly enough yet." "You don't need to keep saying it," Issei said. "Just keep getting stronger." "That's thanks enough." Asia nodded, determination settling more firmly across her features, and returned to her drills with renewed focus. And Issei found himself, watching her go, quietly grateful for exactly how far she had come in such a short span of time, from a frightened, lonely stranger on a park bench to a steady, determined member of a peerage that had, without any of them quite planning it, become something worth calling family. Chapter 16. By the second week of preparation, Rias called for a full-scale simulation, the arena reconfigured to approximate the kind of open, layered terrain a formal raiding game against the Phenex peerage was likely to feature, complete with simulated opposing pieces calibrated, as closely as Underworld technology allowed, to match Riser's known peerage composition and combat tendencies. The simulation exposed weaknesses none of them had fully anticipated. Kiba's speed, effective against individual targets, faltered against coordinated dual pressure from simulated rook and knight pieces working in tandem, exposing gaps in the peerage's broader positional awareness. Akino's lightning, devastating in open engagement, proved less effective against the simulation's approximation of Riser's bishop pieces, whose defensive barriers absorbed sustained ranged attacks more efficiently than anticipated. "We're too reliant on individual strength winning individual exchanges," Rias observed afterward, studying the simulation's tactical readout with tight, focused frustration. "Riser's peerage, whatever its individual limitations, has considerably more experience fighting as a coordinated whole. That experience gap is going to cost us if we don't close it." "Then we close it," Issei said. "We've got 2 weeks left. That's enough time, if we're honest about what's not working yet." The following days brought a shift in Rossweisse's training approach, less focused on individual technique refinement and more deliberately structured around forcing the peerage to function as a single, adaptive unit under simulated pressure that deliberately targeted their coordination gaps. Issei found himself, increasingly, stepping into a role less like the peerage's decisive weapon and more like its connective tissue, reading openings created by Xenovia's aggression or Kiba's speed and closing them at exactly the right moment to prevent simulated counterattacks from developing. "You're thinking 3 steps ahead of the rest of us," Xenovia observed, during a brief rest between drills, wiping sweat from her brow with visible, grudging respect. "How? 8 years of watching Sirzechs adapt mid-fight taught me to read momentum before it fully develops," Issei said. "It's less about predicting exactly what happens next and more about noticing which openings are about to exist a few seconds before they actually do." "Could you teach that?" Xenovia asked, direct as always. "I can try," Issei said. "It's mostly repetition, honestly. The same kind of patience Grayfia drilled into me for years before any of it felt natural." Over the following days, Issei found himself, almost without fully intending it, stepping increasingly into a teaching role alongside Rossweisse, sharing fragments of the discipline and pattern recognition his 8 years of training had instilled, adapting lessons meant originally for a single overwhelmingly powerful student into something the rest of the peerage could genuinely absorb and apply. Rias watched this shift with quiet, growing appreciation, and one evening, after a particularly demanding simulation that finally showed the coordination improvements Rossweisse had been pushing toward, she found Issei alone near the arena's edge, watching the rest of the peerage wind down from the day's exhausting drills. "You've changed how this peerage operates," she said, joining him. "Not by being the strongest piece on the board, though you certainly are that. By making everyone else stronger around you. I don't think I fully appreciated how rare that actually is, until I watched it happen over these past 2 weeks." "I didn't do it alone," Issei said. "Rossweisse built the structure. I just filled in what I could." "Don't undersell it," Rias said, a faint, warm smile touching her mouth. "Riser's peerage has years of coordinated experience we simply don't have time to fully replicate before the match. But what we're building instead, genuine trust, genuine adaptability, people who've learned to read each other under real pressure rather than simply following assigned roles. I think that might matter more than raw experience, when it actually counts." "I hope you're right," Issei said. "So do I," Rias admitted, some of her usual composed confidence giving way, briefly, to something more openly uncertain. "This match decides more than just my personal circumstances," Issei. "It decides what kind of peerage we actually are, under real pressure, against an opponent who won't hesitate to exploit every weakness we haven't closed yet." "Then we'll close them," Issei said, the same quiet, unwavering certainty he had carried since their very first conversation in the courtyard, weeks that felt, now, considerably longer ago than the calendar actually suggested. 1 week left. We'll be ready." Rias looked at him for a long moment, moonlight catching in her crimson hair the same way it had the night of the stray devil fight, and something steady and warm passed silently between them, a promise either of them fully needed to say aloud anymore. 1 week, she agreed. "Let's make it count." Chapter 17. The final week of preparation passed in a steady, focused rhythm, the earlier uncertainty of the simulation's exposed weaknesses giving way, gradually, to something closer to quiet, hard-earned confidence. Rossweisse drills grew increasingly precise, targeting the last remaining gaps in the peerage's coordination with the exacting, professional thoroughness that had defined her teaching from the very first day she arrived at Koh soaked from the rain. 2 nights before the scheduled rating game, Rias called the full peerage together in the arena's central chamber, foregoing the usual tactical briefing in favor of something quieter, more personal. "I want to say something, before tomorrow's final preparations begin," she said, standing at the center of the room, studying each member of her peerage in turn with an expression that carried more open vulnerability than her usual composed leadership typically allowed. "When my brother first told me about the possibility of Issei joining this peerage, I'll admit I saw it, at least partly, as a strategic asset. Something that might eventually help offset the political pressure I'd been quietly carrying for years. I didn't expect what actually happened instead." She looked around the room slowly, at Kido's earnest attention, Kaniko's quiet, watchful stillness, Akino's warm, encouraging smile, Xenovia's steady, direct focus, Asia's nervous but determined resolve, Rossweisse's careful, professional pride, and finally Issei, standing near the back of the group with the same quiet, watchful patience he had carried since their first conversation in the courtyard months earlier. "What actually happened," Rias continued, "is that this became the first peerage I've ever led that felt less like a strategic asset and more like an actual family. Whatever happens tomorrow, win or lose, I want each of you to know that this past year has meant more to me than any political outcome ever could." The room was quiet for a long moment, the weight of her words settling comfortably over the assembled group, before Xenovia, characteristically blunt, broke the silence first. "We're not losing tomorrow, Rias." Sentiment aside. A ripple of quiet laughter moved through the room, easing some of the evening's heavier emotional weight, and Rias's answering smile carried genuine warmth beneath the fading vulnerability. "No," she agreed. "I don't suppose we are." Later that night, after the rest of the peerage had retired to the preparation facility's guest quarters, Issei found Rias still awake, standing alone on a balcony overlooking the arena's vast, quiet expanse, moonlight falling in long silver bars across the empty battlefield below. Couldn't sleep, he said, joining her at the railing. Too much on my mind, Rias admitted. Tomorrow decides a great deal, Issei. My future, this peerage's future, whether everything we've built over these past few weeks actually holds under real pressure instead of simulated pressure. I keep running through every possible outcome, and I can't quite make my mind settle. Issei considered his next words carefully, the way he had learned to consider every word that actually mattered. 8 years of training taught me a lot of things, he said. But the most important lesson Grayfia ever gave me wasn't about strength, or discipline, or control. It was this. You can prepare as thoroughly as humanly possible, and there will still be a moment where all the preparation in the world comes down to simply trusting the people standing beside you. I trust this peerage completely, Rias. I trust you completely. Tomorrow, when it matters most, I don't think that trust is going to let either of us down. Rias turned to look at him fully, moonlight softening the tired, worried edges of her expression into something more open, more unguarded than he had seen from her in weeks. You always know exactly what to say, when it actually counts. Has anyone ever told you that? Grayfia, occasionally, Issei said, a faint smile touching his mouth. Though she usually phrased it as a complaint rather than a compliment. Rias laughed, quiet and genuine, some of the evening's heavy tension finally easing from her shoulders. I believe that entirely. She grew quiet again after a moment, studying him with an expression that carried something warmer, more complicated than simple gratitude. Whatever happens tomorrow, Issei, I want you to know that meeting you changed considerably more than just my odds against Riser Phenex. I don't think I've properly told you that yet either. You don't need to keep saying it, Issei said, echoing, without quite meaning to, the same words he had once told Asia weeks earlier. Just being here tomorrow, standing beside you, that's thanks enough. They stood together at the railing for a long while after that, the quiet, comfortable silence of two people who had, somewhere over the past several months, become considerably more to each other than commander and pawn, watching moonlight fall across the empty arena where, in less than 2 days, the outcome of considerably more than a single raiding game would finally be decided, somewhere beyond the preparation facility's quiet walls, in a Phoenix family estate considerably less humble than the old school building Issei had come to think of as home. Riser Phenex reviewed his own peerage's final preparations with the same confident, dismissive certainty he had carried since first issuing his challenge, entirely unaware of exactly how thoroughly the underestimated, plainly spoken devil trained by 3 Satans had reshaped the peerage he was about to face. Tomorrow would decide which certainty proved correct. Chapter 18. Morning arrived with the particular clarity that seemed to settle over important days, the preparation facility's artificial sky brightening into a soft, clean gold that Issei suspected had been calibrated deliberately to steady nerves rather than simply mark the passage of time. Sirzechs met them in the facility's central hall, accompanied by Grayfia, whose presence sent an unexpected wave of steadying familiarity through Issei despite the gravity of the day ahead. She studied him with the same careful, assessing attention she had given him during countless morning sessions years earlier, and something in her expression, subtle but unmistakable, carried genuine pride. You look ready, she said simply. I feel ready, Issei said, and found, somewhat to his own surprise, that it was entirely true. The venue has been finalized, Sirzechs said, addressing the full peerage now, his tone shifting into the formal, measured cadence of official raiding game proceedings. A neutral arena, standard Phoenix clan specifications, terrain divided across forest, ruins, and open ground. You'll each be briefed individually on starting positions once the match formally begins. I want you to know, all of you, that whatever happens today, my sister could not have asked for a more capable peerage standing beside her. Rias, standing at the center of her assembled peerage in the same composed, determined posture she had carried since accepting Riser's challenge weeks earlier, allowed herself a brief, grateful smile toward her brother before turning to face the group directly. This is it, she said. Everything we've built these past 3 weeks, everything Rossweisse drilled into us, everything Issei taught us about reading each other under pressure, all of it comes down to the next several hours. I won't pretend I'm not nervous. But I've never been more confident in a peerage's ability to handle whatever comes next. We've got this, Rias Xenovia said, Durandal already resting easily across her back, her expression carrying the same steady, unshakable focus she brought to every serious engagement. Riser Phenex has no idea what he actually challenged. I intend to make certain he regrets underestimating this peerage before the day is finished. Kiba offered a quiet, determined nod. Kaniko's usual reserved stillness carried, this morning, a faint, sharpened edge of readiness. Akino's warm smile held genuine confidence beneath its usual playful edge. Asia, standing slightly closer to Issei than strict formation would require, met his gaze with nervous but steady resolve. I won't let anyone down, she said quietly. You won't, Issei told her. None of us will. Rossweisse, standing at the edge of the group with the same careful, professional pride she had carried throughout the entire preparation period, offered her own final assessment as the group prepared to move toward the transit circle that would carry them to the formal arena. Trust your training. Trust each other. And remember, coordination beats raw individual strength more often than people expect, provided everyone holds their position under pressure. You've all earned the right to feel confident about this. She met each of their gazes in turn as she said it, lingering just a moment longer on Asia, whose nervous energy had visibly steadied over the course of the morning, and on Issei, whose quiet, unshakable calm had, over these past weeks, become something the rest of the peerage had learned to draw strength from without needing to ask him for it directly. The transit circle activated with a bright, formal flare of Gremory crimson, and as Issei felt the familiar pull of Underworld transport begin drawing the assembled peerage toward the arena where Riser Phenex and his own peerage were, at this very moment, almost certainly making their own final preparations, he allowed himself one last look around the small, determined group that had, over the course of a single remarkable year, become considerably more than simply a peerage to him. Family, in every sense that actually mattered. Whatever happens today, he said quietly, mostly to himself, though Rias, standing closest to him, caught the words and offered a small, understanding smile in response. It was worth every step that got us here. The transit circle's light swallowed them whole, and somewhere beyond it, the arena waited, and with it, the beginning of a fight that would decide considerably more than a single contested engagement, one that Issei, 8 years of discipline and a full year of hard-won trust settled steady in his chest, felt fully, completely ready to face. Chapter 19. The arena resolved around them in layers, the transit circle's light fading to reveal a vast, sprawling battlefield considerably larger than anything the preparation facility's simulations had fully conveyed. Dense forest occupied the northern quarter, ancient trees rising tall enough to obscure the artificial sky above, while the southern half opened into broken, half-ruined stone structures, remnants of some long-abandoned settlement recreated with meticulous, unsettling detail. Between the two extremes stretched open, rolling ground, offering either side natural cover, a deliberate design choice meant to force early, decisive engagement for any peerage unwilling to commit fully to either terrain type. Rias's peerage materialized within the forest's northern edge, their designated starting position according to the match's official terms, and Issei felt the shift in atmosphere immediately, a formal, weighted stillness settling over the battlefield that no amount of preparation facility simulation had fully replicated. Riser's peerage will be starting somewhere within the ruins, Rossweisse said quietly, studying a small tactical display projected faintly above her palm, standard issue for the match's official observers. Consistent with his usual preference for structured, defensible terrain. That gives us the forest cover advantage, at least in the opening phase, which he'll expect us to use for a slow, cautious approach, Rias said, her mind already working through the tactical implications with the same sharp, focused clarity she had shown throughout their weeks of preparation. Which means our best opportunity is doing exactly the opposite. A fast, coordinated push before his peerage settles fully into defensive positioning. Aggressive, Xenovia said, a note of approval in her voice. Necessary, Rias corrected. Riser's regenerative advantage only grows more difficult to overcome the longer this match stretches out. Our best chance is ending this decisively, before that advantage becomes the deciding factor. Around them, the forest held an eerie, artificial stillness, no wind stirring the ancient trees, no birdsong breaking the heavy silence. the entire battlefield holding its breath for the formal signal that would mark the match's official beginning. Issei felt Drake stir faintly at the back of his mind, the dragon's presence carrying its own quiet, focused readiness. This is the largest coordinated engagement you have faced since your training concluded, Drake observed, a note of something like anticipation coloring the dragon's usually gruff tone. I find myself curious to see how thoroughly you have absorbed 8 years of lessons, when it finally matters against a genuine, formally sanctioned opponent. I'm curious too, honestly, Issei murmured, quiet enough that only Drake, and perhaps Rias, standing close enough beside him to catch the words, could hear it. Rias glanced at him, a faint, knowing smile touching her mouth despite the gravity of the moment. Talking to your dragon? He's got opinions about today, Issei said. Mostly professional curiosity, I think, more than actual worry. I share the curiosity, Rias admitted. Though I'll confess to slightly more worry than professional detachment would prefer. Worry's not a weakness, Issei said. Grayfia used to say the soldiers who never felt any worry at all were the ones who made the most careless mistakes, because they'd stop taking the outcome seriously enough to stay sharp. You're taking this seriously. That's exactly where you should be. Somehow that's more reassuring coming from you than it would be from almost anyone else, Rias said. I think it's the certainty. You say things like that as though there's genuinely no room left for doubt. There isn't, Issei said. Not about this. Not about you, or this peerage, or what we've built these past 3 weeks. The doubt I'll save for wondering whether Riser's peerage has any idea what they've actually signed up for. Rias let out a soft, surprised laugh, some of the morning's heavier tension easing from her shoulders despite herself. I almost feel sorry for them. Almost, Issei agreed, a faint smile touching his own mouth for the first time since they had stepped through the transit circle. Akino, positioned nearby with her usual composed readiness, offered a soft, reassuring laugh. Worry is reasonable, Rias. It simply means you understand exactly how much today matters. I'd trust it more than false confidence, honestly. Kiba, crouched low near the forest edge, sword already drawn and resting lightly across his knees, glanced back toward the group with quiet, focused determination. Formation positions, once the signal comes? Exactly as we drilled, Rias confirmed. Kiba and Xenovia lead the initial push, drawing their front line's attention. Kaneko holds center, ready to reinforce whichever flank needs it first. Akino provides ranged support the moment resistance solidifies. Asia stays protected at the rear, ready to heal the instant anyone needs it. Issei. She paused, meeting his gaze directly. You're our answer to whatever Riser throws at us that the rest of the formation can't immediately handle. Trust your instincts. You've read this peerage's rhythm better than any of us these past 3 weeks. I trust you to keep reading it, when it counts most. I will, Issei said, quiet, unwavering certainty settling into the promise. The forest's heavy stillness held a moment longer, the entire assembled peerage settling into focused, ready silence, each member privately steadying themselves for whatever the next several hours held. Asia, positioned carefully near the rear of the formation, caught Issei's eye briefly, her earlier nervousness visibly giving way to quiet, determined resolve. Stay safe, she said softly. All of you. We intend to, Issei told her, offering a small, steadying smile before turning his attention fully back toward the battlefield ahead, toward the distant, half-obscured shape of the ruins where Riser's peerage waited, confident and settled into their own preferred defensive positioning, entirely unaware of exactly how thoroughly prepared the peerage now facing them across the open ground had actually become. Far across the open ground, within the shadowed remnants of the ruined settlement, Riser Phenex stood at the center of his own assembled peerage, reviewing their final positioning with the same lazy, self-assured confidence he had carried since first issuing his challenge weeks earlier. His peerage, considerably more experienced in formally sanctioned raiding game engagements than Rias's own, settled into practiced, familiar defensive formation with the easy efficiency of a group that had fought together, successfully, many times before. Word from our scouts places Gremory's peerage entering from the northern forest. As expected, one of his knights reported, kneeling briefly before rising back to readiness. No unusual deviations from projected strategy. Predictable, Riser said, a faint, satisfied smile touching his mouth. Rias has always favored careful, cautious approaches when the stakes run high. It's one of her more exploitable qualities, honestly, however admirable her caution might be in other circumstances. His gaze drifted, briefly, toward the northern treeline, distant and still beneath the arena's artificial sky. Our only genuine variable today is her new pawn. The one trained by Satans, if the rumors carry any real weight at all. Should we adjust the defensive formation accordingly? His queen asked, her tone carrying the careful, measured caution of someone who had, unlike her king, taken the underworld rumors somewhat more seriously. No, Riser said, dismissive confidence settling firmly back into place. One pawn, however impressively trained, does not overturn an entire peerage's tactical disadvantage. Rumors grow larger with every retelling. I've fought enough overhyped opponents to know the difference between genuine threat and underworld gossip inflated well past any reasonable proportion. He straightened, surveying his settled, confident peerage with clear, proprietary satisfaction. Hold formation. Let them come to us. Whatever advantages careful preparation might have given Rias's peerage, our experience and my own regenerative capability will decide this match long before exhaustion becomes a genuine concern for either side. Unseen by either peerage, high above the arena's carefully constructed terrain, the match's official signal horn began. At last, its slow, formal rise toward the sound that would mark the true beginning of the engagement, the culmination of 3 weeks of relentless preparation, a full year of hard-won trust, and 8 years of discipline that had, in ways Issei could never have fully predicted from that first frightened night in his parents' basement, brought him to exactly this moment. Standing shoulder to shoulder with the people who had become, unmistakably and completely, his family. Across the open ground, in the shadowed ruins, Riser Phenex waited with the same untested, confident certainty he had carried into every previous engagement of his life, entirely unaware of exactly how thoroughly that certainty was about to be tested. While in the northern forest, Rias Gremory's peerage stood ready. 8 years of Satan-trained discipline and 3 weeks of hard-won coordination settled steady behind every one of them. The horn sounded. Chapter 20. The horn's sound had barely faded before Rias's peerage moved as one, breaking from the forest edge in the tight, practiced formation Rossweisse had drilled into them across 3 grueling weeks, Kiba and Xenovia surging ahead across the open ground with matched, precise speed. Riser's front line met them at the boundary between open ground and broken ruin, 2 of his knights breaking from formation to intercept, blades flashing in the arena's artificial light. Xenovia's first strike came in low and heavy, Durandal's holy edge forcing her opponent into an immediate, desperate parry that visibly staggered him, while Kiba wove past the second knight's guard with fluid, unpredictable footwork honed against weeks of simulated resistance. They're stronger than the simulation projected, Kiba called out, deflecting a strike aimed at his ribs and answering with a fast counter that opened a shallow cut along his opponent's forearm. Then adjust, Rias called back, already moving to reinforce the center with Kaneko close behind her. We knew their real performance would exceed the simulation's baseline. Stay adaptable. Issei held position at the formation's rear, exactly as Rias had instructed, watching the engagement's rhythm unfold with the same careful, patient attention Sirzechs had drilled into him during 100 sparring sessions years earlier. He could see it already, the subtle gaps opening as Riser's knights adjusted to Xenovia and Kiba's unfamiliar coordination, the half-second delays that would, in a few more exchanges, become genuine openings. Not yet, he told himself, old discipline holding steady against the instinct to close the distance immediately. Let the formation work first. A sudden, concussive blast tore through the ruins ahead, sending chunks of broken stones scattering across the open ground, and Issei's attention snapped instantly toward its source, a woman with long purple hair hovering above the battlefield's central structure, a wicked, satisfied smile on her face as she summoned a second explosive orb into being. Eubelina, Rias said grimly, recognizing the threat immediately. Riser's queen. That's their primary range defense. Aquino, counter her, now, before she gets a second volley off. Aquino was already moving, lightning crackling to life around her raised hand as she launched herself skyward to meet the bomb queen's aerial advantage directly, the 2 of them trading devastating, precise strikes across the open sky above the ruins while the ground engagement continued to churn below. Kaneko reached the center line moments later, meeting Riser's rook in a bone-jarring collision that sent shockwaves rippling outward across the cracked stone ground, her raw strength holding firm against an opponent considerably larger than herself with the same steady, immovable composure she had shown throughout their entire preparation period. "She's holding," Rias observed, tension threading through her focused voice as she monitored the engagement's rapidly shifting balance. "But Eubelena's aerial bombardment is going to become a problem if Akino can't fully neutralize her soon." Issei felt it then, the precise moment the formation's rhythm shifted, the gap he had been watching for finally beginning to open as Riser's second knight, overextended from his exchange with Kiba, left his flank exposed for a fraction of a second too long. "Now," he murmured and moved. Chapter 21. The boosted gear flared to life along Issei's arm as he crossed the open ground in a burst of controlled, disciplined speed, closing the distance to Riser's overextended knight before the man had fully registered the threat approaching from his exposed flank. "Boost," Dre grumbled, and Issei did not press the advantage recklessly, mindful of Rossweiss' repeated insistence that overwhelming individual strength meant little if it disrupted the formation's broader coordination. A single, precisely placed strike sent the knight crashing backward into a section of ruined wall, unconscious before the dust had settled, and Kiba, freed from his own exchange, offered a quick, grateful nod before pivoting immediately to reinforce Kaneko's ongoing struggle against Riser's rook. "One down," Rias called, her tactical focus never wavering even as she monitored 3 simultaneous engagements at once. "Issei, hold position near Kiba and Kaneko's flank, in case Riser's remaining knight tries anything similar." Above the battlefield, Akino and Eubelena's aerial exchange had grown increasingly fierce, lightning and explosive fire trading blow for blow across the open sky, either combatant gaining a decisive advantage despite the visible strain both were beginning to show. "She's tougher than the intelligence reports suggested," Akino called down between exchanges, a thin line of blood tracing down her cheek from a near miss. "I could use an assist, whenever the ground formation can spare one." Rias's jaw tightened, weighing the tactical cost of pulling anyone away from the increasingly contested ground engagement. "Issei, can you reach her?" Issei studied the aerial engagement's rhythm for a fraction of a second, the same patient reading of momentum he had practiced for weeks, and nodded once. "I can close the gap on the next exchange." He waited, watching Eubelena's pattern of attack settle into a brief, predictable rhythm as she prepared another explosive volley, and launched himself skyward the instant her attention fixed fully on Akino, boosted strength carrying him considerably higher and faster than his opponent had any reason to expect from a devil still relatively new to true aerial combat. Eubelena's eyes widened in genuine surprise as Issei closed the final distance, her explosive orb only half formed by the time his boosted fist connected solidly with her exposed side, the impact sending her spiraling down toward the ruins below in a trail of scattered purple hair and stunned, disoriented confusion. "That's considerably more direct than I expected from Rias's new pawn," she managed, catching herself just above the ground with visible effort, her earlier confident smile now edged with genuine wariness. "You'll get used to it," Issei said, landing beside Akino in the open air with the same steady, unhurried calm he brought to every engagement. "Together this time?" Akino's answering grin carried genuine, sharpened focus despite her earlier exhaustion. "Together." The combined assault that followed left Eubelena with considerably less room to maneuver, Akino's lightning forcing evasive movement that repeatedly left her exposed to Issei's boosted strikes, and within a handful of exchanges, the Bomb Queen's earlier confident aggression had given way entirely to desperate, purely defensive maneuvering. "Riser," she called out, her voice carrying clear, urgent strain across the battlefield below, "I could use some support up here, unless you'd prefer explaining to your family why your queen was defeated so early into the match." Far below, in the ruin's central chamber, Riser Phenex watched the rapidly deteriorating situation with his first genuine flicker of concern since the match had begun, his earlier dismissive confidence visibly cracking under the weight of a formation performing considerably better than any Underworld rumor had prepared him for. Chapter 22. "This is unacceptable," Riser muttered, watching Eubelena's aerial retreat with mounting frustration, his remaining peerage members gathering around him within the ruins' central chamber for hurried, urgent reassessment. 2 pieces down within the opening minutes, and Rias's pawn is proving considerably more disruptive than the intelligence reports suggested. The reports underestimated him significantly, his remaining rook observed grimly, watching the battlefield's rapidly shifting balance through a small tactical display. He's not simply overwhelming individual opponents. He's actively identifying and exploiting formation gaps as they open, in real time, faster than any standard trained pawn should be capable of. Then we adjust, Riser snapped, old confidence hardening into something considerably more focused and calculating. Consolidate the remaining formation around the central ruins. Force them into a defensive engagement on our preferred terrain, where numbers and structural advantage still favor us. I'll handle Rias's pawn personally, once the formation stabilizes. Outside, across the contested ground, Rias watched the shift in Riser's positioning with sharp, immediate recognition. They're consolidating. Falling back to defensible terrain, which buys Eubelina time to recover and rejoin the fight from a stronger position. Rossweisse's voice crackled faintly through the match's official communication link, monitoring the engagement from the arena's observation deck alongside Sirzechs and Grayfia. Don't give them that time. Press the advantage now, before their formation fully consolidates. Agreed, Rias said, already redirecting her formation with sharp, decisive urgency. Kuoh, Xenovia, push directly into the ruins, don't let them settle into fixed defensive positions. Kaneko, hold the rear approach in case they attempt to flank around us. Issei, Aquino, continue pressing from above, keep Eubelina suppressed until she's fully out of the fight. The engagement that followed grew increasingly fierce as both peerages committed fully to the ruins' broken, chaotic terrain, exchanges of speed and strength and precise magical strikes echoing across shattered stone corridors that offered either side clean, unobstructed advantage. Xenovia's Durandal carved through Riser's remaining defensive line with brutal, disciplined efficiency, while Kuoh's speed found repeated openings and gaps the enemy formation could not fully close under the combined pressure. Above the chaos, Issei and Aquino finally cornered Eubelina against the ruins' tallest remaining structure, her earlier confident aggression fully exhausted, her explosive attacks growing increasingly desperate and imprecise under sustained, coordinated pressure. I yield, she finally called out, breathless and visibly spent, raising both hands in clear, unmistakable surrender as the match's official arbitration system registered her concession with a soft, formal chime audible across the battlefield. Riser owes me considerably more than gratitude after this. Issei allowed himself a brief, quiet exhale of relief as Eubelina's piece formally registered as eliminated from the match, the tactical display above the arena's observation deck updating with the engagement's steadily shifting balance. 3 of Riser's pieces down, against none of Rias's own peerage yet eliminated, a lead considerably more decisive than even their most optimistic preparation had projected. Don't get comfortable, Drake warned quietly, the dragon's own focus sharpening as Issei descended back toward the ongoing ground engagement. Riser has not yet entered this fight directly. His own regenerative capability remains untested, and Phoenix heirs rarely commit personally until genuinely necessary. That likely means he still believes he holds a decisive advantage in reserve. Then we'll find out exactly what that advantage is, Issei murmured, and we'll close it, same as everything else today. Chapter 23. The ground engagement had shifted decisively in Rias's favor by the time Issei rejoined the formation. Riser's remaining rook and second knight pressed into a tightening, increasingly desperate defensive position against Xenovia and Kuoh's relentless, coordinated advance. Kaneko held the rear approach firm against a late, failed flanking attempt from Riser's remaining bishop pieces, her raw strength proving more than sufficient to discourage further attempts. Their formation is collapsing, Rias observed, tactical satisfaction sharpening her focused expression as she monitored the battlefield's rapidly narrowing balance. Riser's going to have to commit personally soon, or concede the match outright. As if summoned by the observation itself, the ruined central chamber's remaining wall crumbled outward in a sudden, controlled burst of golden fire, and Riser Phenex stepped through the resulting opening with the same languid, confident poise he had carried since first issuing his challenge, though the confidence now carried a harder, more focused edge beneath its familiar surface. Enough, he said, his voice carrying clear across the battlefield's chaos, and the remaining engagements paused instinctively at the weight of his sudden, direct presence. I'll admit, Rias, your peerage has proven considerably more capable than I anticipated. It seems the rumors surrounding your new pawn carried more truth than I initially credited them. You could still concede, Rias said, though there was little genuine expectation in the offer, more formal courtesy than real hope. Save your remaining peerage further unnecessary harm, and admit defeat before even testing my own capability against yours directly? Riser's familiar smile returned, sharper now, more genuinely engaged than his earlier dismissive confidence had allowed. I think not. I've indulged my family's patience long enough waiting for this engagement to resolve itself through negotiation. I'd rather settle it properly here myself. His gaze shifted deliberately toward Issei, standing at the formation's edge with the same steady, watchful calm he had carried throughout the entire match. You're the one everyone's been discussing so breathlessly, then. Let's see if 8 years of Satan-trained discipline holds up against genuine Phoenix regeneration. Gladly, Issei said, stepping forward without hesitation, old training settling comfortably into focused, ready stillness. Issei, Rias said, a note of genuine concern threading beneath her tactical focus. Phoenix regeneration is not a minor obstacle. Riser can recover from damage that would incapacitate almost any other opponent, repeatedly, for as long as he retains sufficient reserves. This won't be a simple, decisive exchange. I know, Issei said, meeting her gaze briefly before turning his full attention back toward Riser. Which means I'll just have to be thorough. Riser's laugh carried genuine, confident amusement at that, gold fire gathering steadily around his clenched fists as he settled into a ready stance. Confidence again. I do admire it even now. Let's see how long it survives actual contact. He struck first, closing the distance with sudden, blistering speed, gold flame trailing behind each rapid strike, and Issei met the assault with the same patient, economical defense Sirzechs had drilled into him across 100 sparring sessions, deflecting and redirecting rather than meeting force directly with force. Studying his opponent's rhythm with the same careful attention he had applied to every engagement since the match's opening horn. Boost, Drake rumbled, the familiar surge of doubled strength settling into Issei's limbs as he finally began answering Riser's aggression in kind, and the exchange that followed grew rapidly more intense, gold fire and crimson draconic power colliding across the ruins' broken terrain in a display that drew even Riser's remaining peerage members to pause and watch. Their own engagements momentarily forgotten in the face of their king's own direct confrontation. Chapter 24. The fight between Issei and Riser stretched on considerably longer than any other engagement across the battlefield, both combatants trading blow for blow with escalating intensity. And true to Rias's earlier warning, every solid hit Issei managed to land against Riser began healing almost as quickly as it had been dealt, gold flame knitting torn flesh and cracked bone back together within seconds. You see the problem now, I trust, Riser said, breathing hard but grinning through the exchange's mounting toll, a shallow gash along his cheek already closing before he had finished speaking. You can strike me as many times as your strength allows. It simply won't matter, in the end. I'll outlast you, eventually, however impressive your training might be. Maybe, Issei said, deflecting another gold flame wreathed strike and answering with a boosted counter that sent Riser skidding backward across cracked stone. Or maybe I just need to hit you faster than you can heal. Boost, Drake said again, and again, the familiar rhythm of doubled strength stacking steadily higher with each activation, and Issei felt the old, careful calculation Ajuka had drilled into him settle firmly into place, the patient mathematics of output against recovery time that 8 years of theoretical training had prepared him, specifically, to eventually apply against exactly this kind of regenerative opponent. Riser's confident grin began, gradually, to falter as the exchange's pace accelerated, Issei's strikes landing with increasing frequency and force, each successive boost narrowing the gap between damage dealt and damage healed just slightly further than the last. What had begun as an even, sustainable exchange for the Phoenix heir slowly, steadily, became something considerably more strained. Your regeneration is remarkable, Issei acknowledged, pressing the advantage with disciplined, relentless focus, but it's not infinite. Eventually the rate you're healing falls behind the rate I'm hitting you. That's just simple math, and I've had 8 years to get very comfortable with it. Riser's expression hardened, old arrogance giving way finally to genuine, focused effort as he abandoned his earlier confident restraint entirely, gold flame intensifying around him as he matched Issei's escalating pace with everything his own considerable strength could offer. Then let's see whose math actually holds up, boy. The exchange that followed grew brutal in its intensity, both combatants pushing past the comfortable margins either had maintained until now, the surrounding ruins trembling under the force of each collision, and Issei felt, distantly, the watching gazes of both peerages, of Rias standing tense and focused at the formation's edge, of Sirzechs and Grayfia observing from the arena's official deck. Of the entire Underworld audience whose interest in this particular match had grown considerably. Beyond simple curiosity about an unusually trained pawn, boost, drag rumbled one final time, and Issei felt the accumulated power settle fully into place, the careful, patient mathematics finally tipping decisively in his favor. He closed the last distance to Riser in a single, boosted burst of speed, driving a final, concentrated strike directly into the Phoenix heir's chest with enough force to send him crashing through the last standing section of the ruin's central wall entirely. Silence fell across the battlefield as the dust slowly settled, both peerages watching the wreckage with held breath, waiting to see whether Riser's regeneration would, once again, knit him back together for another exchange. It did not. Chapter 25. Riser lay motionless amid the rubble for a long moment, gold flame flickering weakly around him in diminishing, exhausted pulses, his regenerative capability finally, genuinely spent after the sustained, escalating pressure of the exchange's final minutes. The match's official arbitration system registered the outcome with a soft, formal chime, considerably louder and more final than the smaller concessions that had marked Yubelina's earlier defeat. Riser Phenex, eliminated, the arbitration voice announced, clear and unmistakable across the entire arena. Victory, Rias Gremory. The battlefield's remaining tension broke all at once, Riser's surviving peerage members lowering their weapons in immediate, unquestioning concession, while across the ruins, Rias's own peerage allowed themselves, finally, the full relief of the match's decisive conclusion. Xenovia let out a whoop of genuine, unrestrained triumph. Kida's usual composed calm broke into a wide, relieved grin. Kaneko permitted herself a small, satisfied smile, and high above, Akino's exhausted laughter carried clearly across the settling dust. Issei crossed the rubble toward where Riser still lay, breathing hard but conscious, and extended a hand without hesitation, old training tempering victory with the same respect Sirzechs had always insisted mattered as much as strength itself. Riser stared at the offered hand for a long moment, old pride visibly warring with the plain reality of decisive, thorough defeat, before finally, grudgingly, accepting it and allowing Issei to help him back to his feet. I underestimated you considerably, Riser admitted, brushing dust and rubble from his ruined clothing with as much wounded dignity as he could manage. Both your strength, and apparently your restraint. You could have ended that exchange more brutally than you did. There wasn't any reason to, Issei said simply. You fought fairly, once the match actually began. That deserved something better than unnecessary cruelty. Something in Riser's expression shifted at that, old arrogance softening, just slightly, into something closer to genuine, if reluctant, respect. Perhaps I've misjudged more than simply your strength, then. He straightened, turning toward Rias as she approached across the settling rubble, his voice carrying, for the first time since the challenge had first been issued, something that sounded almost like sincere acknowledgement rather than performed courtesy. The engagement is dissolved, Rias, as agreed. My family will finalize the necessary arrangements formally within the week. I won't pretend I'm pleased by the outcome. But I'll admit fairly that your peerage earned this considerably more thoroughly than I expected. Thank you, Riser, Rias said, and there was genuine, exhausted relief in her voice beneath the composed formality, an entire year of quiet, unwanted obligation finally, fully lifting from her shoulders. I hope, whatever comes next for both our families, this doesn't need to remain contentious between us. No, Riser agreed, a faint, rueful smile touching his mouth as he glanced once more toward Issei. I don't suppose it does. Though I'll admit some genuine curiosity about exactly what else 8 years under 3 Satans prepared you for, Hyoudou. I suspect this won't be the last impressive thing I hear about you. He gathered his remaining peerage with quiet, tired efficiency, and the group withdrew through a formal Phoenix transit circle without further ceremony, leaving the battlefield settling dust and scattered rubble to the celebrating, exhausted, thoroughly triumphant peerage that remained. Chapter 26. The celebration that followed, once the full peerage had gathered back at the preparation facility, carried the particular, unrestrained joy of people who had spent 3 exhausting weeks preparing for a single decisive outcome and had, against considerable odds, achieved it fully. Sirzechs embraced his sister with open, unreserved pride the moment the transit circle deposited them safely back at the facility, Grayfia's usually composed expression carrying, for once, an openly warm smile as she offered her own quiet congratulations to the assembled peerage. I've never seen a peerage this young perform so decisively against an opponent with genuinely superior formal experience, Sirzechs said, addressing the group at large with clear, genuine admiration. Whatever you built together these past 3 weeks, I hope you understand exactly how remarkable it actually was. We had good teachers, Rias said, glancing meaningfully toward both Rossweisse and Issei in turn. And a peerage willing to trust each other completely, when it actually mattered. Rossweisse, standing slightly apart from the celebration with her usual professional composure, allowed herself, for once, a genuinely broad, satisfied smile. I've trained plenty of talented individuals over the years. I've rarely seen a group learn to function as a single, cohesive unit this quickly. Whatever comes next for this peerage, I suspect you're all considerably more prepared for it than you realize. Asia, standing close beside Issei with visible, relieved exhaustion, let out a soft, grateful laugh. I was so worried I'd fail everyone, when the fighting actually started. I'm glad it didn't come to that. You held your position perfectly, Issei told her, genuine warmth in the assurance. Every time someone needed healing you were there. That mattered more than you're giving yourself credit for. The celebration stretched late into the facility's artificial evening, exhaustion and relief and genuine, unrestrained happiness mixing freely among the assembled peerage, and it was well past the point most of them had retired for the night that Issei finally found himself alone with Rias once more, standing on the same balcony where they had shared a quiet conversation the evening before the match. We did it, Rias said quietly, staring out over the now empty arena below, moonlight falling softly across the battlefield where, only hours earlier, the outcome of her entire future had been decisively settled. I still can't quite believe it, honestly. A year of quiet dread, finally resolved in a single afternoon. You did it, Issei corrected gently. I just helped. You did considerably more than simply help, Rias said, turning to face him fully, something warm and openly grateful settling behind her tired, relieved eyes. Issei, I don't think I've properly told you what this actually means to me. Not just the engagement, though that matters more than I can easily put into words. The way you've changed this entire peerage, the way you've made every single one of us stronger simply by believing we were capable of it. I don't know how to properly thank you for that. You don't need to, Issei said, echoing, gently, the same quiet reassurance he had offered Asia weeks earlier, though something in his voice carried, this time, a warmth considerably more personal than simple reassurance alone. Just seeing you free of something you never wanted, that's thanks enough for me. Rias studied him for a long, quiet moment, moonlight softening her tired, openly emotional expression into something unguarded and genuine, and the distance between them, comfortable and familiar after months of steadily building trust, closed slightly further than it ever had before. I meant what I said the night before the match, she said quietly. Meeting you changed considerably more than just my circumstances with Riser. I think I've known that for a while now, honestly, longer than I've properly admitted, even to myself. Issei felt something steady and warm settle fully into place in his own chest, 8 years of careful discipline giving way, gently, to something considerably simpler and more honest than any lesson Grayfia had ever drilled into him. I've known it for a while too, he admitted. I just wasn't sure how to say it, without it sounding like it mattered more than the peerage, than everything we've built together. It matters differently. But it matters just as much. Rias's answering smile carried more open warmth than he had ever seen from her, the last of the evening's composed, exhausted formality finally giving way entirely to something quieter and considerably more personal. Then maybe we don't need to say it perfectly tonight, she said. We've got time, don't we? You said that yourself, a while back. I did, Issei agreed, a faint, genuine smile touching his own mouth. And I still mean it. Chapter 27. The following morning brought a quieter, more grounded return to ordinary rhythm, the peerage gathering back at the old school building's clubroom for the first time in 3 weeks, the familiar, worn furniture and comfortable clutter carrying a particular warmth after so long spent in the preparation facilities' more sterile, formal halls. It's strange, Kiba observed, settling into his usual chair with visible, genuine contentment. I almost missed this room, these past 3 weeks. I didn't expect to feel that strongly about a school clubroom. It stopped being just a clubroom a while ago, Akino said, a warm, knowing smile touching her mouth as she settled beside him. For all of us, I think. Rias, standing near her desk with the same composed, settled authority she carried whenever addressing her peerage directly, allowed herself a small, genuine smile at the observation. It has, hasn't it? Speaking of which, I have a few matters to address, now that the engagement's resolution has been formally settled. She gathered the group's attention with practiced ease, though something in her tone carried more warmth than her usual business-like briefings typically allowed. First, and most importantly, thank you. All of you. What we accomplished these past 3 weeks, and especially yesterday, exceeded anything I genuinely expected when Riser first issued his challenge. I couldn't have asked for a more capable, more dedicated peerage, and I want each of you to know exactly how much that means to me. A quiet, warm murmur of acknowledgement moved through the room, and Rias continued, her tone shifting slightly toward more practical matters. Second, Sona has requested a full debrief on yesterday's match, purely for her own peerage's tactical education, given how thoroughly we outperformed expectations. I've agreed, provided everyone's comfortable sharing what worked and, more importantly, what still needs improvement. Happy to help, Xenovia said. Assuming Sona's peerage can handle a few bruised egos when we explain exactly how badly we outmaneuvered supposedly more experienced opponents. A ripple of amused laughter moved through the room at that, easing some of the morning's lingering formality, and Rias's own smile widened slightly before her expression settled, more seriously, into something considerably more cautious. There's one more matter, she said, that I'd like to address before we fully return to normal routine. Issei, the name Rainier mentioned during the incident with Asia. Kokabiel. She paused, weighing her next words carefully. I've sent formal word to the Underworld regarding both the attack and that name specifically, and I received a response early this morning. My brother's office has confirmed increased Gregory activity along several territorial borders these past few weeks, not simply here in Kuoh. Whatever Kokabiel's actual interest turns out to be, it appears considerably larger than a single hostile cell hunting Asia's sacred gear. The room's earlier warm, celebratory mood sobered noticeably at that, old, familiar tension settling back into place despite the previous day's decisive victory. How much time do we have before it becomes an actual concern? Rossweisse asked, her professional focus sharpening immediately. Unclear, Rias admitted. Which is precisely why I want everyone rested, but alert, over the coming weeks. Whatever Riser's challenge cost us in preparation time, we've more than closed that gap. I intend for us to be equally prepared, whenever Kokabiel's actual intentions finally reveal themselves. Issei absorbed the shift in atmosphere with the same steady, focused calm he brought to every serious threat, old training settling comfortably back into place despite the previous evening's warm, personal conversation with Rias still lingering pleasantly in his thoughts. Whatever quiet, hard-won peace yesterday's victory had earned them, it seemed, was destined to remain, for now, temporary. Then we'll be ready, he said, the same quiet, unwavering promise he had made more times than he could easily count since first arriving at Kuoh, whatever Kokabiel actually turns out to want. Rias met his gaze across the clubroom, something steady and grateful and quietly determined passing between them, the same unspoken understanding that had carried them through Riser's challenge now settling firmly into place around whatever larger, more dangerous conflict waited, patiently, somewhere just beyond the horizon. Outside the clubroom windows, Koah's ordinary streets carried on their quiet, unremarkable morning rhythm, utterly unaware of exactly how much had changed, and how much more still waited to unfold, for the small, determined peerage steadily becoming something considerably more than any of them had originally expected, back when this had all begun with a green light in a frightened child's basement, 8 years and one remarkable, hard-won victory ago. Chapter 28. Xenovia found Issei alone in the school's training grounds that evening, working through a slow, methodical series of forms beneath the fading evening light, the kind of quiet, disciplined practice she had come to recognize over the past several months as something closer to meditation for him than genuine training. You could be resting, she observed, settling onto a low stone bench at the training ground's edge, Durandal resting across her knees. We did just win a formally sanctioned rating game yesterday, in case the excitement of it all has already faded for you. Old habit, Issei said, easing out of his final form and turning to face her. Grayfia used to say a soldier who stops training the day after a victory usually finds himself unprepared for whatever comes next. I never quite managed to unlearn that particular lesson. A fair lesson, given everything Rias mentioned this morning about Kokabiel, Xenovia said, her earlier teasing tones sobering somewhat. Though I'll admit, watching you fight Riser yesterday taught me something I hadn't fully appreciated before, even after months of training alongside you. What's that? Restraint, Xenovia said. I've spent most of my life believing strength meant hitting harder, moving faster, simply overwhelming whatever stood in front of you. Watching you calculate exactly how much force that fight actually required, no more, no less, that was a different kind of strength than anything the church ever taught me. I find myself wanting to understand it better. Issei considered her words carefully, recognizing the genuine, searching curiosity beneath the characteristic bluntness. Restraint isn't really about holding back strength, he said. It's about understanding exactly what a situation actually calls for, and trusting yourself enough to give exactly that, without either shorting the effort or wasting more than necessary. Grayfia spent years teaching me that distinction. I still don't always get it perfectly right. Would you teach me, Xenovia asked, direct as always, the way you taught the rest of the peerage during preparation? Properly, I mean. Not just borrowed fragments during group drills. I'd be glad to, Issei said, genuine warmth in the offer. Though I should warn you, it's mostly patience and repetition. Nothing particularly dramatic about the actual process. I've never minded patience, Xenovia said, rising from the bench and drawing Durandal into a ready stance, provided the outcome's worth it. And after yesterday, I'm fairly convinced it is. They trained together well past the evening's fading light, Issei walking her carefully through the same foundational patience Grayfia had once drilled into him across countless mornings years earlier, and if his attention occasionally drifted, briefly, toward the memory of last night's quiet conversation with Rias on the preparation facility's balcony, Xenovia was gracious enough. Or perhaps simply focused enough on her own steadily improving control, not to comment on it directly. Chapter 29. Rossweisse evening lesson, 2 days later, carried a different quality than usual, less focused on pure technical instruction and more, gradually, on quiet conversation that stretched comfortably beyond their scheduled hour. I received an interesting offer this morning, she mentioned, watching Issei work through a complex layered casting exercise with the same critical, professional attention she always brought to his training. The Norse liaison office would like to extend my assignment here indefinitely, given how thoroughly this peerage's recent performance reflected on my instruction. Issei's concentration flickered, just slightly, at the news, though he kept his casting steady. That's good news, isn't it? I thought you'd been hoping for something more permanent than the original loan arrangement. I had, Rossweisse admitted, something careful and slightly uncertain entering her usually confident tone. Though I'll admit, the reasons I'm considering accepting have grown somewhat more complicated than simple professional ambition these past few months. Issei let the casting exercise finish, the small, precisely rendered circle dispersing cleanly, and turned to face her fully, giving the conversation his complete attention. Complicated how? Rossweisse hesitated, an unusual enough occurrence for someone typically as direct and exacting as she was that Issei found himself waiting patiently, without pressing, for whatever she needed a moment to properly consider. I spent most of my career being underestimated, she said finally. Passed over, dismissed, treated as competent but unremarkable. This assignment, this peerage, you specifically, honestly, has been the first place in years where I've felt genuinely valued for what I actually bring, rather than simply tolerated despite it. I find myself considerably more reluctant to leave than professional logic alone would suggest is reasonable. Something warm and quietly moved settled into Issei's chest at the admission, recognizing, beneath her characteristic directness, a vulnerability she rarely allowed herself to show so plainly. I'd like you to stay, he said simply. Not just because the peerage benefits from your instruction, though it obviously does. Because I've genuinely valued these lessons, Rossweisse. More than I think I've properly told you. Rossweisse's usually composed expression softened into something more openly pleased than her professional demeanor typically permitted. That means considerably more than you probably realize, coming from someone whose approval I've apparently grown rather invested in earning. Then it's settled, Issei said, a faint, genuine smile touching his mouth. You're staying. And I'm going to keep learning everything you're willing to teach me, for as long as you're willing to teach it. I suppose I am, Rossweisse said, her own smile, rare and genuine, briefly breaking through her usual professional composure. Though don't expect the lessons to get any easier simply because we're on friendlier terms now. I still expect precision. Wouldn't want it any other way, Issei said, and meant it fully, recognizing, not for the first time, exactly how much this quiet, exacting, fiercely dedicated instructor had come to mean to him over these past several months, in ways that had grown, gradually and genuinely, into something considerably warmer than simple professional respect. Chapter 30. The formal warning arrived a week later, delivered not through Sona's usual discreet channels but through a direct visit from Azazel himself, the Gregory's governor stepping through a private transit circle into the old school building's clubroom with an easy, deceptively casual air that did little to disguise the genuine gravity of his visit. Relax, he said, raising both hands at the immediate, sharp tension his sudden appearance provoked across the assembled peerage. I'm here as a courtesy, not a threat. Rias, your brother and I have an old understanding, and given what's apparently been building in this district these past several weeks, I thought it best to deliver certain information personally rather than through official channels. Rias's posture remained carefully guarded despite his reassurance, old wariness settling firmly into place. Kokabiel, Azazel confirmed, his easy manner sobering considerably. I won't pretend the situation is simple. He's grown increasingly convinced that renewed conflict between our factions and the Underworld serves the Gregory's long-term interests, and he's been quietly gathering resources toward that end for longer than I'd like to admit I noticed. The cell operating here, hunting your new bishop's sacred gear, was very likely an early, opportunistic piece of a considerably larger plan. How much time do we have? Rossweisse asked, her professional focus sharpening immediately at the assessment. Difficult to say precisely, Azazel admitted. Weeks, at minimum, before he's fully prepared to move on whatever he's actually planning. I'd guess considerably less. Which is why I wanted this information reaching you directly, rather than filtered through official channels that might move too slowly to matter. Issei absorbed the warning with the same steady, focused calm he had carried through every serious threat since arriving at Koh, old training settling comfortably into place despite the fresh, sobering weight of Azazel's assessment. What does he actually want? Azazel's gaze settled on him with open, evaluating curiosity, the same assessing attention Issei had grown accustomed to from nearly every senior figure he had encountered since his training first concluded. You're the one everyone's suddenly discussing so breathlessly, then. I'll admit, I came partly out of professional curiosity, given the rumors. As for Kokabiel, my honest assessment is that he's after conflict itself, more than any single specific objective. He believes peace between our factions has made us complacent, and he's the kind of fallen angel who genuinely believes renewed war would restore some lost sense of purpose to our people. It's a dangerous kind of conviction, precisely because there's no simple negotiation that resolves it. The clubroom fell into heavy, considering silence at the assessment, the weight of Azazel's warning settling firmly over the peerage's earlier, hard-won celebratory mood. Then we prepare, Rias said finally, her composed, determined authority reasserting itself despite the sobering news. Whatever Kokabiel actually intends, we won't be caught unprepared for it. We've proven that much, at least, these past several weeks. Azazel studied her for a long moment, something approving and genuinely respectful settling behind his casual, easy expression. I believe you have, at that. For what it's worth, Rias, you've built something here considerably more capable than most people in the Underworld currently appreciate. I'd keep that advantage close, in the weeks ahead. He took his leave shortly after, the transit circle folding closed behind him with the same easy, understated efficiency of his arrival, and the clubroom settled into quiet, focused contemplation, the peerage absorbing the full weight of a threat considerably larger and more dangerous than anything they had faced since Issei's arrival. Issei found Rias's gaze across the room, the same steady, unspoken understanding passing between them that had carried them through Riser's challenge now settling, deliberately and firmly, around this new, considerably more dangerous horizon. Whatever Kokabiel actually brings, he said quietly, we'll be ready for it. Same as always. Same as always, Rias agreed, and the old school building's clubroom, quiet and worn and steadily becoming something considerably more permanent than either of them had ever expected, settled into the familiar, determined calm of a peerage preparing, once again, for whatever fight waited patiently just beyond the horizon. Chapter 31. Sona's promised debrief took place 2 days after the raiding game. Her own peerage gathered in the student council room with notebooks and careful, studious attention, and Issei found himself, somewhat to his own surprise, genuinely enjoying the process of walking through the match's tactical decisions alongside Rias and the rest of their peerage. The formation shift after Eubelina's elimination, Sona said, tapping a stylus thoughtfully against her tactical display. You committed Issei to the aerial engagement despite the ground formation's ongoing pressure. That's a considerable risk, pulling your strongest piece away from the primary engagement. What made that the correct call, rather than simply reinforcing the ground assault directly? Eubelina's bombardment was the greater long-term threat, Rias explained, gesturing toward the display's replay of the engagement's opening minutes. Sustained aerial pressure would have eventually worn down our ground formation regardless of how well Xenovia and Kiba performed individually. Removing that threat early was worth the temporary risk to our ground coordination. And you trusted Kaneko and the others to hold that gap without direct reinforcement, Sona's queen, Tsubaki, observed, careful, analytical interest in her tone. I trusted the preparation we put in, Rias said simply. 3 weeks of coordination drills meant every member of this peerage could hold their position independently, if the situation required it. That trust was earned, not assumed. Sona studied the tactical display a moment longer, something thoughtful and genuinely impressed crossing her usually composed expression. This is considerably more sophisticated coordination than I expected from a peerage with your collective experience level, Rias. I'll admit, I came into this debrief expecting to learn more about individual strength than genuine tactical development. I'm pleasantly surprised to find the opposite proved true. We had good teachers, Rias said again, the same warm acknowledgement she had offered during the peerage's own celebration days earlier, glancing meaningfully toward Rossweisse and Issei in turn. The debrief stretched through the better part of the afternoon, Sona's careful, methodical questions drawing out every meaningful tactical decision from the match's full duration, and by its conclusion, something had shifted subtly in the easy, comfortable rapport between the two peerages, mutual respect settling more firmly into place than the friendly but occasionally competitive dynamic that had defined their relationship before. I hope you'll consider joint training exercises going forward, Sona said, as the debrief finally wound to its close. Particularly given Azazel's warning about Kokabiel. If renewed conflict is genuinely on the horizon, I'd rather our peerages face it having trained together, rather than discovering each other's blind spots for the first time during an actual crisis. I'd like that, Rias said, genuine warmth in the agreement. We could all benefit from learning each other's rhythms more thoroughly, before it becomes strictly necessary. Walking back toward the old school building afterward, Rias fell into step beside Issei. The afternoon's productive, collaborative energy still settled comfortably between them. You handled that well, she observed. Sona doesn't extend genuine respect easily. I could tell she meant it, by the end. I just answered honestly, Issei said. Same as I try to do with most things. It's one of the things I've come to appreciate most about you, Rias admitted, a faint, warm smile touching her mouth. You never seem to feel the need to perform confidence, or competence, or anything else. You simply are what you are, plainly, and somehow that plainness ends up being more convincing than any amount of careful posturing ever could. Grayfia used to say something similar, Issei said. Though she usually framed it as a warning against unnecessary theatrics, rather than a compliment. Rias laughed, quiet and genuine, the easy warmth between them settling comfortably into the kind of familiar rhythm that had grown, gradually and steadily, into something considerably more than simple friendship over these past several months. I think I'd like to meet her properly again sometime. Grayfia, I mean. Beyond the brief, formal introductions we've had so far. She'd like that, Issei said. Though fair warning, she doesn't warm up to people quickly. It took me the better part of a year before she stopped treating every conversation like a formal inspection. I've been patient with considerably more difficult challenges than that, these past several months, Rias said, glancing sideways at him with open, genuine affection. I think I can manage Grayfia's particular brand of formality, given enough time. They walked the rest of the way back toward the old school building in comfortable, companionable silence, the afternoon's productive debrief and the week's earlier sobering warning about Kokabiel settling into the same steady, familiar rhythm that had carried them through Riser's challenge, a peerage, and a partnership, continuing to grow stronger with every new trial it faced together. Chapter 32. Preparations for whatever Kokabiel actually intended began in earnest the following week, though Rias was careful to balance the renewed training schedule against the peerage's genuine need for rest after the demanding weeks leading up to the raiding game. Mornings returned to a steadier, more sustainable rhythm, individual technique refinement rather than the relentless, exhausting pace of formal match preparation, while evenings increasingly incorporated the joint exercises Sona had proposed, the two peerages gradually learning each other's tendencies and rhythms under Rossweisse careful, exacting supervision. Issei found himself, during one such joint session, paired against Sona's own knight, a quiet, disciplined young man named Saji whose absorption line sacred gear made for an unusually interesting tactical puzzle. Your gear neutralizes magical output on contact, Issei observed, circling carefully during a controlled sparring exchange, mindful of Saji's genuine, if still developing, threat potential. That's a considerable advantage against opponents who rely heavily on magical output rather than physical strength. Doesn't seem to be doing me much good against you, though, Saji admitted, breathing hard after failing, again, to land a solid connection against Issei's careful, patient defense. Your boosted strength doesn't exactly require magical output to be dangerous. Different problem entirely, Issei agreed, deflecting a determined strike and offering a brief opening deliberately, curious to see how Saji would respond to unexpected opportunity. Though your gear's got more potential than you're probably giving it credit for. Absorption isn't just defensive. Given enough training, you could turn captured energy into your own offensive advantage. Saji's eyes lit with sudden, genuine interest at the suggestion, momentarily forgetting the sparring exchange's competitive pressure entirely. Nobody's really explained it to me that way before. Most of the Citri peerage treats my gear as a purely defensive tool. Every gear's got more potential than its most obvious application suggests, Issei said. Mine took years to fully understand, and I still find new applications for it occasionally. Yours is considerably younger. Give it time, and the right training, and I suspect you'll surprise people. Saji absorbed the assessment with visible, genuine appreciation, and their sparring session continued with renewed, focused energy, Saji's technique sharpening noticeably even within a single session as he began experimenting, cautiously, with the offensive applications Issei had suggested. Watching from the training ground's edge, Sona observed the exchange with quiet, considering attention. Your pawn has a talent for drawing out potential other people haven't fully recognized in themselves yet, she observed to Rias, who stood beside her monitoring the same exchange with open, genuine pride. That's a rarer gift than raw strength, in my professional opinion. I've noticed the same thing, Rias said. He did the same for my entire peerage, during preparation for the raiding game. I don't think even he fully appreciates how significant that particular talent actually is. Some people rarely do, Sona said, a faint, knowing smile touching her usually composed expression. Which, I suspect, is precisely what makes it genuine rather than performed. The joint training sessions continued through the following days, gradually building not just tactical familiarity between the two peerages but genuine, comfortable camaraderie, shared meals after exhausting drills, easy conversation that drifted comfortably beyond strict training matters, the kind of steady, unforced trust that Issei recognized, with quiet satisfaction, as exactly the foundation Azazel's warning about Kokabiel had made considerably more urgent to establish. Chapter 33. Late one evening, nearly 2 weeks after Azazel's visit, Issei found himself alone in the old school building's training grounds, working through familiar forms beneath a sky considerably more ordinary than the arena's carefully constructed artificial expanse had been, when Asia found him there, carrying 2 cups of tea with the same careful, gentle consideration that had defined her presence since the very night they first met. "I thought you might want company," she said, offering one of the cups as he eased out of his final form. "You've seemed a bit distant these past few days." "More than usual, I mean." Issei accepted the tea gratefully, settling onto the same low stone bench Xenovia had claimed weeks earlier, and considered Asia's gentle observation honestly. "Kokabiel, mostly," he admitted. Azazel's warning left more questions than answers, and I keep turning over what considerably larger conflict might actually mean, once it finally arrives. Asia settled beside him, her presence carrying the same quiet, steadying warmth it always did. "Are you frightened?" The question, direct in the particular way only Asia seemed able to ask difficult things without any judgment attached to them, gave Issei genuine pause. "Not frightened, exactly," he said finally. 8 years of training left me fairly confident in my own ability to handle whatever comes. It's more that I've got considerably more to protect now than I did when that training began. That changes the weight of it, somehow, even if the confidence stays the same. "I understand that, I think," Asia said quietly. "Before I met all of you, I didn't have much left to lose, honestly. Now I find myself thinking about it more than I probably should. Whether I'll be strong enough, when it actually matters, to protect the people who've given me so much." "You already have been," Issei told her, gentle but sincere. "The raiding game proved that. Whatever comes next, you'll be ready for it, the same way you were ready then." Asia's answering smile carried quiet, grateful warmth, and they sat together in comfortable silence for a while, the evening settling comfortably around them, before she spoke again, her voice carrying a note of careful, thoughtful curiosity. "Can I ask you something, Issei? About Rias?" Something in Issei's chest tightened slightly at the question, though not unpleasantly. "Of course. I've noticed the way you two have grown closer these past several weeks," Asia said, gentle and entirely without judgment. "I think everyone has, honestly. I just wanted you to know, whatever happens between you and Rias, I'm happy for both of you. You deserve whatever quiet happiness you can find, especially given everything that might still be coming." Issei felt genuine warmth settle through the careful weight of the evening's earlier concerns, grateful, not for the first time, for exactly how much kindness Asia carried within her, freely offered without any expectation of return. "Thank you, Asia. That means more than I think you realize." "I mean it completely," Asia said. "This peerage, this family we've all built together, it's the first place I've ever truly belonged. I want everyone in it to be happy, in whatever way actually makes sense for them." They finished their tea together in companionable, easy silence, the evening's earlier weight of uncertain, looming conflict settling into something more manageable beneath the steady, grounding comfort of genuine friendship, and when Issei finally rose to head back toward the old school building, he found himself considerably more settled than he had been at the evening's start, old training and newfound family working together, as they always seemed to steady him against whatever uncertain horizons still waited. Chapter 34. The final days of relative calm before whatever Kokabiel actually intended stretched on with a particular, bittersweet quality, the peerage settling into their strengthened, steady rhythm even as the underlying awareness of a larger, looming threat never fully faded from the edges of every conversation. Rias called one final, informal gathering before what she suspected might be the last genuinely quiet evening for some time. The entire peerage assembled in the old school building's clubroom with simple, comfortable food and easy, unstructured conversation rather than any formal briefing or training schedule. I wanted us to have this, she explained, settling into her usual chair with visible, contented warmth as she surveyed the gathered group. Whatever comes next, with Kokabiel, with the Gregory, with anything else the Underworld decides to throw at us, I wanted us to remember exactly what we're protecting, beyond simple tactical obligation. Family, Xenovia said simply, echoing the same word Rias had used weeks earlier during her own quiet address before the raiding game. That's what we're protecting. Family, Rias agreed, warmth settling fully into her tired, genuine smile. This peerage started, for me, as a practical necessity, and somewhere along the way, without any of us fully planning it, became something considerably more meaningful than that. I don't think I properly understood how rare that actually was, until I watched all of you fight for each other, and for me, during the raiding game. The evening stretched comfortably into genuine, easy celebration, stories shared, quiet laughter, the particular warmth of people who had built something worth protecting together settling firmly over the old clubroom's worn, familiar furniture. Issei found himself, at one point, standing near the window with Rias beside him, watching the rest of the peerage's easy, comfortable camaraderie with quiet, contented satisfaction. Whatever Kokabiel brings, Rias said quietly, close enough that only Issei could properly hear it over the room's easy background chatter. I think we're as ready for it as any peerage could reasonably be. That's largely thanks to you, you know. Not just your strength. The way you taught all of us to trust each other properly. We did it together, Issei said, echoing, gently, the same correction he had offered after Riser's defeat weeks earlier. I just helped. You keep saying that, Rias said, a faint, fond smile touching her mouth, and I keep needing to remind you it's not entirely true. But I suppose I understand why you insist on it. It's part of what makes you who you are. They stood together a while longer, watching the peerage's warm, easy celebration continue around them, and somewhere beyond the clubroom's comfortable, familiar walls, beyond Kuoh's quiet, ordinary streets, the first genuine stirrings of Kokabiel's considerably larger, more dangerous plan continued gathering shape, patient and deliberate, waiting for the moment it would finally, fully arrive. But for one more evening, surrounded by the family he had found in the most unexpected of places, Issei allowed himself, fully and without reservation, to simply be grateful for exactly how far 8 years of discipline and one remarkable year of hard-won trust had actually brought him. Whatever came next, he felt certain, they would face it exactly the same way they had faced everything else since that first conversation in the courtyard so many months ago. Together, Rias echoed quietly beside him, close enough that the single word carried more warmth than simple agreement alone would account for, and outside the clubroom windows, the last of the evening light settled slowly into night over a town that had, in ways none of them could have fully predicted 8 years ago, become something worth calling home. Chapter 35. The morning after the peerage's quiet celebration, Issei rose before dawn out of habit, 8 years of Grayfia's discipline pulling him from sleep well before the alarm he rarely needed would have sounded, and found, somewhat to his surprise, that Rias had done the same, standing alone in the clubroom's early light with a small, worn photograph in her hands. Couldn't sleep either, she said, not quite a question, as he joined her near the window. Old habit of mine, actually, on mornings when something important is about to change. I used to do this before every major family obligation, growing up. Wake early, sit with my thoughts, before the day demanded anything of me yet. Issei glanced at the photograph she held, a much younger Rias standing beside Sirzechs, both of them laughing at something outside the frame, the easy, uncomplicated warmth of it a stark contrast to the careful, composed poise she carried through most of her adult responsibilities now. You look happy there. I was, Rias said, a faint, wistful smile touching her mouth. Before politics, and family obligations, and engagements I never agreed to complicated things. I keep this photograph as a reminder, honestly, that the person underneath all the responsibility is still allowed to feel that way, sometimes, if I let her. You still do, Issei said. I've seen it, plenty of times these past several months. Last night, watching everyone celebrate together. The night we won against Riser. It's still there, Rias. It never actually left. Rias looked at him for a long, quiet moment, morning light softening her tired, thoughtful expression into something openly grateful. You have a way of noticing things about people that they don't always notice about themselves. I don't think I've properly thanked you for that particular gift, among everything else. You don't need to, Issei said, the same gentle reassurance he had offered so many times before, though it never seemed to lose its sincerity with repetition. Just keep being exactly who you are. That's more than enough. She set the photograph down carefully on her desk, facing outward now rather than tucked away, and turned to face the window fully, the first genuine light of morning spreading slowly across Koah's quiet, waking streets below. Whatever Kokabiel brings, she said, echoing the same quiet resolve that had carried them through every trial since Issei's arrival. I think I'm finally ready to face it, not just as Rias Gremory, heir to my family's obligations, but as exactly the person in that photograph. Happy and surrounded by people who genuinely care what happens to her. You've always been both, Issei said. I just think it took the right people, and the right trials, to help you remember it. Rias's answering smile carried the full, unguarded warmth of someone who had, after a long, difficult year, finally found her way back to something she had feared quietly she might have lost for good. Thank you, Issei. For all of it. The training, the peerage, everything you've helped this family become. Thank you, Issei said, for trusting me enough to let it happen. They stood together at the window a while longer, watching the sun fully rise over Koah's quiet streets, the promise of whatever conflict Kokabiel was still gathering shape somewhere beyond the horizon settling, for now, into something they both felt genuinely ready to face, together, exactly as they had faced everything else since that first conversation in the courtyard so many months ago. Downstairs, the rest of the peerage began stirring, familiar footsteps and quiet, sleepy conversation drifting up through the old building's worn floorboards, and Issei found himself, standing there beside Rias in the early morning light, thinking back, briefly, to a frightened 8-year-old boy sitting alone in a basement, staring at a green light he did not understand and could not turn off. That boy could never have imagined this, a peerage built on genuine trust rather than simple obligation, a fight won not through overwhelming force alone but through patience and coordination and people who had learned, gradually and completely, to believe in each other. He could never have imagined Rias, standing here beside him, or Rossweisse exacting patience, or Xenovia's blunt, steady loyalty, or Asia's gentle, unwavering kindness. 8 years of discipline had taught him control. This past year had taught him something considerably more valuable, that control was never meant to be an end in itself, only the foundation upon which everything worth protecting could finally, safely be built. Whatever Kokabiel brought, whatever trials still waited beyond the horizon, Issei felt ready to meet them, not as a weapon trained by Satans, but as exactly what that frightened 8-year-old had once hoped to become. Someone who never had to be afraid of his own strength again, because he had finally found people worth using it for. Thanks for listening.